Tonight, we begin with a question that sounds simple, but carries the weight of 8,000 meters of ice and stone. What if I told you the smiling faces you see in those Everest summit photos are attached to bodies running on borrowed time? Lungs that are slowly drowning in their own fluid, and minds calculating whether the next step might be their last. Forget the inspirational documentaries and feel-good montages about conquering mountains. We're about to drop you into the life of a Himalayan Sherpa, and I promise you, within the first 24 hours, you'll be begging for your climate-controlled office and complaining co-workers. Picture this. It's 3 in the morning, and you're waking up not to an alarm clock, but to the sound of your own lungs fighting for oxygen in air so thin, it feels like breathing through a wet towel wrapped around your face. Your body temperature has dropped during the night, despite the sleeping bag rated for negative 40 degrees. Because the tin-roofed room you're crammed into with 7 other climbers has gaps in the walls wide enough to slide your fingers through. The wind screaming down from Pumori sounds like a freight train that never quite arrives. Just circles endlessly, promising violence. Your head pounds with the early stages of altitude sickness, a feeling like someone's driving an ice pick through your temples while simultaneously inflating a balloon inside your skull. You haven't even left your sleeping bag yet. And already your body is staging a revolt, sending urgent signals that you're operating in an environment fundamentally hostile to human life. But here's the thing that separates you from the wealthy clients still sleeping off their jet lag and altitude headaches. You don't have the luxury of acclimatization days or turning back if things get rough. You're a Sherpa, which means you're genetically adapted to high altitude through thousands of years of evolution. Sure, but that doesn't make you superhuman despite what the trekking company's marketing materials suggest. It just means you can suffer at 26,000 feet, where others would die at 18,000. Your adaptation is the reason you're valuable, and your value is the reason you're expendable. While the clients are paying $65,000 for their Everest summit attempt, you're making between $3,000 and $6,000 for the season, and that's if you survive to collect it. No life insurance policy worth mentioning. No pension plan. No workers' compensation if you fall into a crevasse or get swept away by an avalanche. Just the cold mathematics of poverty meeting opportunity in the death zone, where the bodies of your predecessors still lie frozen in the positions they died, permanent markers of the mountain's indifference. You swing your legs out of the sleeping bag and immediately regret it as the cold air hits your skin like a slap. The temperature inside this room is hovering around negative 15 degrees Celsius, which feels tropical compared to what's waiting outside. But your body doesn't care about comparisons. It cares about the fact that your toes have gone numb and your fingers are already stiffening as you fumble for your layers. 5 layers minimum before you even think about stepping outside. Thermal underwear that you haven't properly washed in 2 weeks because water is too precious to waste on laundry. A fleece mid-layer, a down jacket, waterproof shell, and that's just your torso. Your feet require similar arithmetic. Liner socks, thick wool socks, insulated boots rated for 8,000-meter peaks. Though the rating is optimistic at best and assumes you're not standing still for hours while fixing ropes or waiting for clients to figure out their crampons. The darkness is absolute. The kind of darkness that exists only at high altitude where there's no ambient light pollution, no street lamps, no welcoming glow from nearby houses. Just you, the mountain, and the stars, so bright and numerous they look fake. Like someone went overboard with the special effects. But you don't have time to appreciate celestial beauty because you've got work to do. And that work starts with a breakfast that would make a nutritionist weep. Heavily sweetened tea that's more sugar than liquid. Some rice that's been cooked and recooked until it's barely recognizable. Maybe a chapati if you're lucky. Your body needs somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 calories a day to function at this altitude, to maintain your core temperature, to fuel the endless physical labor. But you'll be lucky to consume 3,000 because appetite disappears in thin air along with your sense of taste and your ability to digest food properly. Everything you eat sits in your stomach like a stone, and you've learned to ignore the constant low-grade nausea that comes with altitude, the way you've learned to ignore the headaches, the insomnia, the strange dreams that come from oxygen-deprived sleep. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe so you'll always know when a new one is uploaded. And I'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're listening from and what time of day it is for you. The first task of your day involves something that sounds deceptively simple. Walk to base camp, which sits at 5,364 meters above sea level. Except you're not starting from some comfortable lower elevation. You're already at Namche Bazaar at 3,440 meters, and you're carrying 40 kilograms of gear and supplies on your back because that's what Sherpas do. You're the logistics that make mountaineering possible. The invisible infrastructure that turns a suicidal scramble up a frozen rock into something wealthy Westerners can check off their bucket lists. Your load includes climbing ropes, spare oxygen bottles, tents, food supplies, cooking equipment, and whatever personal items your assigned client forgot to pack or decided were too heavy to carry themselves. The trail from Namche to base camp takes most trekkers 4 to 5 days of gradual ascent, with rest days built in for acclimatization. You'll do it in 2, maybe 3 if the weather turns bad. And you'll do it with a load that weighs more than many of the clients attempting the summit. Your spine has already compressed from years of this work. Your vertebrae grinding together under loads that would hospitalize an average person. And you're only 28 years old. By 40, if you make it that far, you'll have the back of a 70-year-old, the joints of someone twice your biological age, the lungs scarred by repeated exposure to extreme altitude. But that's future you's problem. And right now, you need to focus on present you's problem, which is getting this load up the trail without twisting an ankle on the rocks or stumbling off a cliff edge in the pre-dawn darkness. The headlamp strapped to your forehead throws a pathetic cone of light maybe 10 meters ahead. Illuminating prayer flags fluttering in the wind. The occasional whitewashed chorten. The endless stone steps built by porters and Sherpas over decades. These steps are a mercy and a curse. They make the trail navigable, sure, but they're also uneven, unpredictable, designed by accretion rather than planning. And in the darkness, each one is a potential twisted knee or shattered ankle. You've learned to walk with a shuffling, almost meditative gait, feeling your way as much as seeing it. Your body's center of gravity shifted forward to compensate for the massive load on your back, held in place by a tump line that crosses your forehead and distributes some of the weight to your neck and spine. Western trekkers see this traditional carrying method and think it's quaint, traditional, a cultural practice worth photographing. What it actually is biomechanics born from necessity. The tump line engages your entire posterior chain, from your neck through your back to your legs, distributing the load across as much muscle and bone as possible. because carrying 40 kilograms any other way would simply break you faster. And make no mistake, it's still breaking you, just slowly. Vertebra by compressed vertebra. Disc by herniated disc. The cold at this hour is profound. A physical presence that seeps through your layers and settles into your bones. Your breath comes out in great plumes of vapor that freeze on your eyelashes and the fabric of your face mask, tiny ice crystals accumulating until you have to stop and brush them away, or risk them freezing your mask to your face. The moisture from your breath also condenses inside your jacket, and by the end of the day, the inner layer will be damp with frozen sweat, a condition that will slowly drain your body heat all night until you can dry it out. Which you can't, not really. Not up here where nothing ever truly dries. You pass other Sherpas on the trail, dim figures hunched under their own massive loads, and you exchange brief nods or a few words in Nepali. There's a camaraderie here, born from shared suffering and shared purpose. But it's not the backslapping brotherhood that mountaineering literature loves to describe. It's quieter than that, more resigned. You're all in the same trap. You need the money, the mountain provides the money, and the price is your body, and sometimes your life. Every Sherpa you pass has lost someone. An uncle to an avalanche, a brother to a fall, a cousin to altitude sickness that turned into cerebral edema before he could descend. The mountain takes and takes, and you keep coming back because the alternative is worse. The alternative is watching your children go hungry, your parents age without medical care, your community sink deeper into the poverty that has defined this region for generations. Tourism and mountaineering brought wealth to the Khumbu region, sure, but it's a strange, unequal wealth that concentrates in the hands of trekking company owners and expedition organizers, while the people actually risking their lives make a fraction of the profit. You're considered lucky to have this job, and by local standards, you are lucky. You're making more money in a climbing season than you could make in a year farming the rocky terraces around your village. But luck is a relative concept when your workplace is the death zone, and your job description includes recovering frozen corpses. By the time the sun finally rises, you've been walking for 3 hours and you've gained 700 meters in elevation, and your body is sending increasingly desperate signals that something is wrong. Your heart is hammering at 130 beats per minute just to maintain this steady, shuffling pace. Working overtime to move oxygen through blood that's thickening as your body produces more red blood cells to cope with the thin air. Your fingers have gone from cold to numb, to that strange, painful tingling that means they're right on the edge of frostbite. And you stop to adjust your gloves, a process that requires removing your outer mittens and working with stiff inner gloves that don't really want to cooperate with your equally stiff fingers. The sunrise in the Himalayas is objectively beautiful. The kind of thing that ends up on motivational posters and travel magazines. Golden light spilling across impossible peaks. The shadows of giants stretching across glacial valleys, the sky transitioning through shades of pink and orange and purple that seem too saturated to be real. And you notice it, you do. Because you're not immune to beauty just because your vertebrae are compressing under 40 kilograms of gear. But the beauty is also irrelevant, a pleasant distraction at best. Because the mountain doesn't care if it's pretty, and neither does your screaming lower back. The trail gets steeper as you approach Tengboche, and now you're dealing with switchbacks cut into near vertical hillsides. each turn requiring you to shift your massive load carefully to avoid the momentum pitching you off balance. You've seen inexperienced porters misjudge these turns, seen them stumble, seen the panic in their eyes as their load pulls them backward or sideways toward the edge. You've also seen them recover, because you don't survive long as a mountain porter without developing an almost supernatural sense of balance and an intimate understanding of your body's center of gravity. But you've also seen the ones who didn't recover, who went over the edge still strapped to their loads, and you know that the line between making it and not making it is sometimes just a shifted bootlace or a loose stone under your heel. The clients you'll be guiding, the ones paying their $65,000 for the privilege of standing on top of the world. They'll never do what you're doing right now. They'll carry day packs with their water bottles and snacks, maybe 8 to 10 kilograms maximum. And they'll still complain about how hard it is. And it is hard for them. You're not dismissing their experience entirely because they're not adapted to altitude like you are. Their bodies don't produce the enhanced mitochondrial efficiency that generations of high-altitude living have bred into your cells. But there's a difference between hard and impossible, between discomfort and disability. And what you're doing right now would be impossible for most of them, even if they were adapted. You pass through Tengboche Monastery, where tourists stop to take photos and monks offer blessings for the climb ahead. And you don't stop because stopping means losing momentum, means making it that much harder to start again. The monastery bells are ringing for morning prayers, the sound carrying across the valley with a clarity that only exists in thin air. And it's beautiful and spiritual and completely irrelevant to the burning in your thighs and the way your hip joints are grinding in their sockets. Religion is important to you. It is, you grew up Buddhist. You believe in the sanctity of the mountains. You've done your pujas and received your blessings. But right now, at this exact moment, with sweat freezing in your hair and your lungs fighting for every breath, faith feels like a luxury for people who aren't carrying loads that could kill them. After Tengboche, the trail drops down into a river valley before climbing back up the other side, because the Himalayas are cruel like that, making you give up hard-won elevation just to gain it back again. The descent is almost worse than climbing because you're fighting gravity differently now, your knees absorbing the impact of each downward step, while simultaneously controlling the momentum of 40 kilograms trying to pitch you forward. You've blown out your knees multiple times, suffered tears to your meniscus and your ACL, and each time you've had them roughly patched up by whatever medical care is available in Kathmandu. Then come back for another season because you need the money, and because, honestly, what else would you do? Your education stopped at grade 8 when you had to start working full-time to help your family. You don't have skills that translate to office work or trades. And even if you did, the jobs available in your village pay maybe $100 a month versus the $3,000 to $6,000 you can make in a climbing season. So you descend into the valley, cross the freezing river on a suspension bridge that sways alarmingly under the combined weight of you and your load, and start climbing again. Each step a small negotiation between your body's desire to quit and your mind's understanding that quitting isn't an option. By midday, you've reached Ferike at 4,240 meters, and your body is entering a state of controlled crisis. The headache that started as a dull throb at dawn has evolved into something sharper, more insistent. The kind of pain that makes your vision blur at the edges and turns your stomach. You're experiencing the early stages of acute mountain sickness, which sounds dramatic, but is actually just your body's reasonable response to operating in an environment where the available oxygen is roughly 60% of what you'd get at sea level. Your brain is swelling slightly inside your skull, pushing against bone, and the nausea you've been ignoring all morning is threatening to become vomiting, which would be bad because you need every calorie you can keep down. But here's the thing about being a Sherpa. Acute mountain sickness is just Tuesday for you. You've learned to differentiate between the normal misery of altitude and the dangerous progression toward high-altitude pulmonary edema or high-altitude cerebral edema, the conditions that actually kill people. You know what your baseline suffering feels like versus what emergency suffering feels like. And right now, you're still in the baseline zone, so you keep walking. You stop in Ferice long enough to gulp down some more heavily sweetened tea and force yourself to eat a portion of dal, but that tastes like cardboard mixed with sadness, because at altitude, your taste buds stop working properly, and everything becomes a joyless exercise in caloric intake. The lodge where you stop is run by a family you've known for years, because the climbing community in the Khumbu is small and interconnected, and everyone knows everyone else's business. The lodge owner's daughter asks about your family while pouring your tea, and you tell her your younger brother just started guiding treks, and she tells you her cousin died last season in an avalanche on Manaslu. And you both nod because this is just the reality of life here. Death woven into the economic fabric like a dark thread. You rest for 30 minutes, which is all you can afford because you need to reach base camp before nightfall. And 30 minutes of sitting means 30 minutes of your muscles stiffening and your joints locking up, which will make the next section of trail even more agonizing. When you hoist your load back onto your shoulders, your knees genuinely buckle for a moment, and you have to lock them consciously. Force them to accept the weight again. Override their very reasonable objection to what you're doing. The trail from Ferice to base camp crosses the Khumbu Glacier, which is less like a glacier and more like a frozen river that decided to have a psychotic break. The surface is a chaos of ice towers called seracs, deep crevasses hidden under thin snow bridges, meltwater streams running across the surface before disappearing into holes that drop into blue ice darkness. The trail across this nightmare is marked by cairns and prayer flags. But marked is a generous term. You're basically following the path of least resistance through a landscape that shifts and changes every season as the glacier flows and cracks and rearranges itself. You're walking on ice that's moving, sliding downhill at maybe 30 to 40 centimeters per day, grinding against the valley walls, tearing itself apart with a violence so slow, it's almost gentle. Except when it's not gentle. When a serac collapses without warning, or a crevasse opens up under someone's feet, or an ice bridge that held yesterday doesn't hold today. You've developed an instinct for dangerous ice, a sixth sense born from years of crossing glaciers. But instinct is just pattern recognition plus luck. And eventually, everyone's luck runs out. You're wearing crampons now. 12 metal spikes strapped to each boot, and with every step, you're calculating weight distribution, ice quality. Whether that slightly different color means solid ice or hidden crevasse. Your 40-kilogram load has become a liability in a new way. If you break through a snow bridge, the weight will drag you down faster, make it harder to self-arrest, reduce your chances of grabbing the edge. You've practiced crevasse rescue, sure, but practicing with a 10-kilogram pack in controlled conditions is different from the real thing with real stakes and real cold and a real void trying to swallow you. The base camp, when you finally see it, is less a camp and more a small temporary city spread across the glacier like a colorful infection. Hundreds of tents in expedition clusters, each group flying their national flags and sponsor banners, dining tents and sleeping tents and equipment tents, generators humming, the smell of cooking fuel and human waste, the constant background noise of dozens of languages mixing together. You navigate through this maze to find your expedition's camp, and you drop your load with a relief so profound it's almost spiritual. Feeling your spine decompress, your shoulders drop, your entire skeletal system sigh with gratitude. Base camp sits at 5,364 meters. And even though this is technically your workplace, even though you've been here dozens of times across multiple seasons, your body never truly acclimatizes to this elevation. You exist here in a state of constant low-grade hypoxia. Your blood oxygen saturation hovering around 85 to 90% when it should be 98 to 100. Your heart working overtime to compensate. Your breathing rapid and shallow, even at rest. Sleep at base camp is a cruel joke. You'll drift off eventually, exhausted beyond measure, only to wake up gasping because your brain forgot to tell your lungs to breathe. A condition called Cheney-Stokes respiration, where your breathing becomes periodic, cycling between rapid breaths and complete pauses that jolt you awake in a panic. You'll do this dance maybe 20 or 30 times a night, never achieving deep sleep, never truly resting, just cycling through states of semi-consciousness while your body desperately tries to adapt to conditions it wasn't designed for. But you don't have time to worry about sleep quality because the work is just beginning. That load you carried up? That was just the first of many. Over the next 2 weeks, you'll make multiple carries between base camp and the higher camps, each time hauling supplies up through the Khumbu Icefall, the most statistically dangerous section of the entire Everest climb. The Icefall is exactly what it sounds like. A waterfall of ice. A section where the glacier flows over a steep drop and breaks apart into a cascading chaos of house-sized ice blocks, bottomless crevasses, and seracs that can collapse without warning. The route through the icefall changes every season and sometimes every week as the ice shifts and rearranges itself. And it's your job, along with the other Sherpas on the Icefall Doctor's team, to establish and maintain the route. You'll be placing aluminum ladders across crevasses, sometimes lashing 3 or 4 ladders together to span gaps that are 40 or 50 meters wide. You'll be fixing ropes along the route, drilling ice screws into seracs that might topple over tomorrow or tonight or 5 minutes from now. You'll be making decisions about which way to route the path, trying to minimize exposure time while acknowledging that there is no safe route through the icefall, only routes that are less suicidal than others. The work starts at 2 in the morning, because the ice is most stable in the coldest part of the night, before the sun hits the icefall and starts the daily cycle of melting and refreezing that makes everything exponentially more dangerous. You're climbing in the dark again, headlamp illuminating just enough ice to make you wish you couldn't see it at all. The icefall at night is a labyrinth of shadows and uncertain depths. Every crevasse a void that seems to go down forever. Every serac a tower that might be solid or might be resting on nothing, held up by ice tension and prayer. You're clipped into the fixed line, but the fixed line is only as good as the ice screws holding it, and the ice screws are only as good as the ice they're drilled into. And the ice is actively trying to kill you through the simple physics of flowing and breaking. You cross your first ladder bridge of the morning, trying not to look down at the crevasse below, trying not to think about how the ladder flexes under your weight, trying not to calculate the odds that one of the aluminum rungs is cracked or that one of the anchor points will pull out. You've done this hundreds of times, but familiarity doesn't breed comfort. It just breeds a kind of exhausted resignation. You know exactly how dangerous this is. You understand the mechanics of ice failure and the statistics of icefall deaths. And you do it anyway, because the alternative is poverty. Each ladder crossing is a meditation on precariousness. You're balancing on metal rungs and crampon points, 25 meters above a crevasse that drops into geological time. With a load on your back that throws off your center of gravity, in air so thin that 3 steps leave you gasping. You develop a rhythm. Step, breathe, breathe, step, breathe, breathe. Never look down, never think about the void. Just focus on the next rung, the next anchor point, the next section of fixed line. You make it through the icefall without incident, which is less an accomplishment and more just luck. And you arrive at Camp 1 at 6,065 meters, just as the sun is beginning to hit the western Seeveberderwumfilm. Camp 1 is a collection of tents perched on the glacier at the top of the icefall. And calling it a camp is generous. It's a temporary survival platform where you'll rest for maybe 2 hours before descending back down through the icefall to base camp, because the altitude here is too severe for extended stays without proper acclimatization. Your job today is to drop off supplies, secure the tents against the wind that screams through the CWM with nothing to stop it, and check the condition of the fixed ropes on the route to Camp 2. You're functioning on maybe 3 hours of interrupted sleep. Your body is running on adrenaline and stubbornness, and you've consumed maybe 1,200 calories in the last 24 hours, which is about a quarter of what you actually need. The Western Sahara is a valley of ice trapped between some of the highest peaks on Earth. Everest, Lhotse, Nuptse, creating walls that funnel wind and trap heat in strange ways. In the middle of the day, the CWM can heat up like an oven, the sun reflecting off the ice and cooking climbers in their down suits, even as the ambient temperature is negative 20 degrees. In the morning, it's just cold. A deep, penetrating cold that makes your bones ache and turns your fingers into clumsy stumps inside your glove. You're checking the fixed ropes, running your hands along the line to feel for damage. Fraying from crampon strikes, ice buildup that has frozen the rope solid, anchor points that have melted out in the sun and need to be reset. This is unglamorous work, invisible work, the kind of labor that clients never see or think about. But it's the difference between a successful summit push and a mass casualty event. You're essentially building and maintaining a highway to the sky. And if you do your job perfectly, nobody notices because nothing goes wrong. You find a section where the rope has been badly damaged, probably from a client dragging their crampons across it. And you splice in a new section, your fingers working slowly because they're cold, and because the thin air makes even simple tasks require intense concentration. What would take you 5 minutes at sea level takes 30 minutes here. Your brain fog slowing your thought process, your hypoxic muscles refusing to cooperate with fine motor control. You're tied into the line while you work, but you're also aware that the line is what you're repairing, which creates a certain existential absurdity. You're trusting your life to a rope that you know is damaged while you fix the damage. Welcome to high-altitude mountaineering, where every safety system is compromised and backup plans have backup plans that are also compromised. After securing the rope section, you have to descend back through the ice fall. And descending is in many ways more dangerous than ascending because you're tired now. Your concentration is shot. Your legs are shaking from exertion and altitude. And the ice fall has been warming in the morning sun, making everything more unstable. You've heard the sounds of ice shifting all morning. Deep groans and cracks that echo through the frozen labyrinth. The occasional crash of a falling serac somewhere in the maze. The timing of icefall transits is everything. Too early and you're navigating blind in darkness. Too late and you're in the sun when the ice starts actively falling apart. You're aiming for the sweet spot. But the sweet spot is narrow and shrinking as climate change accelerates glacial movement and makes the ice fall even more unpredictable than it used to be. You're descending a ladder bridge when you hear it. A deep crack, the sound of ice giving way somewhere close. You freeze, which is exactly the wrong thing to do because freezing means staying exposed. But your brain needs a second to locate the sound, to determine if it's coming from the seracs you're attached to or somewhere else. The crack comes again, louder, and you see it. A massive serac, maybe 200 meters to your left, is calving, shedding house-sized blocks of ice that tumble into the crevasses below with impacts that shake the ground. You're not in immediate danger. The collapse isn't on your route. But you're close enough that if it had been 50 meters to the right, you'd be dead right now. No skill or preparation could save you, just wrong place, wrong time compressed into ice and forgotten. You finish crossing the ladder on shaking legs, and you keep descending, because stopping means thinking, means acknowledging how close that was. And acknowledgement is a luxury you can't afford. Back at base camp, you collapse into your tent and sleep for 4 hours, which feels like both too much and nowhere near enough. When you wake, it's late afternoon, and your body feels like it's been hit by a truck, then backed over by the same truck, then set on fire and thrown into a crevasse. Every muscle is screaming. Your joints feel like they're filled with ground glass, and you've developed a cough that sounds like your lungs are trying to escape through your throat. This is normal. This is what success feels like at altitude. You drag yourself to the dining tent, where the expedition team is gathering for an evening meal and briefing. The clients are arriving now, having finished their acclimatization rotations, and you get your first good look at the people whose lives you'll be responsible for over the next few weeks. There's a tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley who talks constantly about optimizing his performance metrics and has brought enough supplements and medications to stock a pharmacy. There's a surgeon from Australia who seems competent and prepared and might actually make it. There's a retired lawyer from New York who is visibly struggling with the altitude already and probably shouldn't be here but paid his money like everyone else. There's a professional adventurer, some guy with a social media following who's filming everything for content and treats the mountain like a backdrop for his personal brand. They're all wearing brand new gear that still has the tags and creases from the packaging, boots that haven't been broken in, jackets in colors so bright they hurt your eyes. They look like they're dressed for a photo shoot, which, in a sense, they are. Everest has become less about alpinism and more about Instagram-friendly achievement, something to add to the resume, proof that you're the kind of person who does extreme things. The expedition leader is going over the summit rotation schedule, explaining which teams will go when, dependent on weather windows and traffic management. Because yes, there's traffic on Everest now. Queues of people waiting their turn to stand on the summit, which has led to deaths from exposure as people wait in the death zone, burning through their oxygen supplies. You're assigned to the tech entrepreneur. which means you'll be responsible for keeping him alive, managing his oxygen, clipping him into fixed lines, probably carrying his pack when he inevitably runs out of energy, and generally functioning as a combination mountain guide, therapist, and babysitter. He approaches you after the briefing, extends his hand for a shake like you're meeting at a networking event, and introduces himself with his full name and job title, which he clearly expects you to be impressed by. You shake his hand and smile and say it's nice to meet him, because this is part of the job too. Managing client egos, making them feel important and special, even though they're just another body on the mountain, another liability you're being paid to manage. He starts telling you about his training regimen, how he's been working with a personal trainer and a nutritionist, how he's optimized his VO2 max and done altitude simulation training in a hypoxic chamber. And you nod and make encouraging sounds while thinking about how none of that matters. How the mountain doesn't care about his VO2 max or his training optimization or his personal brand. The mountain will take him or let him pass based on a calculus of weather, luck, and whether his body can handle the hypoxia. And no amount of Silicon Valley life hacking changes that equation. That night, you lie in your tent listening to the glacier move beneath you. The constant creaking and groaning of ice in motion, punctuated by the occasional distant boom of a collapsing serac or calving ice. Some clients find this sound terrifying, a reminder that they're sleeping on a living, moving, dangerous thing. You find it almost comforting background noise that means the glacier is doing what glaciers do, following the ancient physics of ice and gravity. What would be terrifying is silence, because silence might mean something has changed, some fundamental shift in the glacier's movement. You're thinking about the season ahead, running through contingencies and worst-case scenarios, because that's what keeps you alive. Assuming everything will go wrong and planning for it. The acclimatization rotation begins in earnest now. A process that will take 2 to 3 weeks of climbing up and down the mountain, forcing your body to adapt incrementally to increasingly severe hypoxia. You've been through this enough times that your body barely needs the rotation. You're already adapted from years of high-altitude work. But the clients need it desperately, and you're along to manage their safety and carry their gear when they inevitably flame out. Day 1 of the rotation. You're climbing through the Icefall again, this time with a tech entrepreneur clipped to the line behind you. He's moving slowly, which is smart, but he's also talking constantly, narrating his experience for the camera mounted on his chest, sharing his thoughts and feelings about the majesty of the Himalayas and the personal growth journey he's on. You want to tell him to save his breath, that talking at this altitude is burning oxygen he'll need for climbing, but he's paying for the experience. And part of what he's paying for is the freedom to nearly kill himself through bad decisions. You're crossing a ladder bridge, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this hundreds of times, when you hear a thud behind you and a yelp. You turn to find the entrepreneur has missed a rung and partially fallen through the ladder, one leg dangling into the crevasse, his chest camera capturing what must be some very dramatic footage of the blue void below. He's clipped into the fixed line, so he's not going to fall to his death. But he's panicking, thrashing, making everything worse. You clip yourself off. Move back to him carefully because the ladder can't hold unlimited weight and thrashing. And talk him through the process of getting his leg back up onto a rung. Your voice is calm, almost bored, because panic is contagious and the last thing you need is both of you freaking out on a ladder over a bottomless crevasse. He gets his leg up gets himself stable, and you see his face through his goggles. Pure terror. The first real understanding that this is actually dangerous, that the Instagram-friendly adventure could actually kill him. Good, you think? Better he learns that now at 6,000 meters than at 8,500 where panic means death. You continue climbing, and he's quieter now. The narration has stopped, which means the fear has penetrated through the layers of privilege and preparation and made contacts with reality. Camp 1, Camp 2, back to base camp. Up again, higher this time, to Camp 2 at 6,400 meters, where the air is thin enough that boiling water takes forever and food tastes like absolutely nothing and sleep is a cruel joke your body plays on itself. The clients are suffering visibly now. Headaches, nausea, insomnia, the whole altitude sickness package. The surgeon is managing okay. The lawyer is struggling badly, throwing up his meals and looking gray and exhausted. The social media guy is still filming everything, but his commentary has devolved into grunts and gasps. And the tech entrepreneur is somewhere in the middle, suffering but functional, his optimization and preparation giving him maybe a 10% edge over his completely unprepared peers. You're cooking dinner in the tent, melting snow for water because there's no liquid water at this altitude. Everything is frozen. And melting snow is a process that takes forever and produces surprisingly little water and consumes vast amounts of fuel. The clients don't think about this, don't consider the logistics of water procurement. They just expect water to be available because someone, meaning you, has done the invisible work of producing it. You're heating up a freeze-dried meal that will taste like salted cardboard. And you're rationing your fuel carefully because you need to make it last for the planned stay plus emergency days. And fuel is heavy, so you can only carry so much. And every calculation at altitude is a game of margins and minimums. The entrepreneur asks you how you deal with the cold, like it's a technique he can learn, a hack he can optimize. You tell him you just endure it. There's no trick. You just accept that you're going to be cold and you keep functioning despite it. He seems disappointed, like he was expecting some secret Sherpa wisdom, some ancient technique that would make the experience comfortable. But there is no comfort here, only degrees of manageable discomfort, and the sooner he accepts that, the better his chances of summiting. The final acclimatization rotation takes you to Camp 3, perched at 7,300 meters on the Lhotse face, a near vertical wall of ice that requires fixed ropes and constant concentration to climb. The Lhotse face is where things get genuinely dangerous in a new way. Below Camp 3, if something goes wrong, you have options for descent. You can self-rescue or be rescued with relative speed. Above Camp 3, rescue becomes exponentially more difficult. The altitude is severe enough that helicopters can't reliably fly. And if you get in trouble, you're basically on your own with whatever resources your team can muster. You're climbing the face in the early morning, front pointing up the ice. Your crampons biting into the frozen surface with each step. Your ice axe planted above you. Your entire body weight hanging from points of contact that are measured in millimeters of metal penetration. The angle is steep enough that you're essentially climbing a ladder made of ice, and the exposure is extraordinary. Fall here and you'll slide down the face, picking up speed, likely hitting rocks or ice features that will kill you long before you reach the bottom. The clients are moving at a crawl, and you're setting the pace, kicking steps, ensuring the fixed ropes are secure, occasionally looking back to make sure everyone is still attached and moving. The tech entrepreneur is doing better than expected. His fitness and optimization paying dividends now that the challenge is purely physical. The lawyer has turned back, couldn't handle the altitude, is descending with another Sherpa. The surgeon and the social media guy are still moving, but barely. Each step requiring visible effort, their breathing audible even over the wind. Camp 3 is less a camp and more a collection of tents bolted onto tiny platforms that were carved out of the ice with considerable effort. The platforms are barely big enough for the tents, and the tents are barely big enough for two people to lie down. And everything is at an angle that makes sleeping feel like you're constantly sliding toward the edge. You secure the clients in their tents, make sure they're drinking water and forcing down food, check their oxygen saturation levels, which are hovering in the dangerously low 70s, and then retreat to your own tent to deal with your own altitude issues. Because despite your adaptation, despite your genetics, 7,300 meters is severe for anyone, and you're experiencing your own version of the misery. Pounding headache, nausea, the feeling that your lungs are full of concrete. You force yourself to drink water, to eat some nuts and chocolate, to take inventory of your body's condition. You're functioning, you're capable, but you're also aware that you're degrading. That time spent at this altitude is time spent dying slowly. Your body consuming itself for energy because you can't eat enough or absorb enough calories to meet the demands being placed on it. The night at Camp 3 is brutal. Wind hammering the tent, the platforms shifting slightly with each gust, which creates a terror that never quite becomes comfortable. You're dozing in and out of consciousness. Not really sleeping, just cycling through states of exhausted hypoxic confusion. At some point deep in the night, you hear shouting, which means something has gone wrong, because people don't shout at Camp 3 unless there's an emergency. You force yourself out of your sleeping bag, out of your tent, into the screaming wind and darkness. One of the other expedition's clients has become severely hypothermic. His tent mate found him unresponsive, and now there's a frantic effort to warm him up, to get hot liquids into him, to decide whether to attempt a night descent, which would be suicidal, or wait for dawn, which might be too late. You're part of the response team now, helping to move the hypothermic climber into a tent with more people for shared body heat. Heating water, preparing oxygen, doing the grim calculus of rescue options. The climber survives the night, barely, and at first light is assisted down the face in a desperate descent that takes all day and exhausts everyone involved. You don't make it back to your own tent until late afternoon, and by then the summit window is opening, the weather is clearing, and the decision is made. Summit push begins tomorrow night. Summit day begins at 11 at night, which seems insane until you understand the logistics. You need to climb through the death zone and reach the summit by mid-morning, then descend back to safer altitude before afternoon weather rolls in, and before your body completely shuts down from the extreme hypoxia. The death zone starts at 8,000 meters, where the available oxygen is roughly 1/3 of sea level. And your body cannot adapt to this environment. It can only survive temporarily before it begins catastrophic failure. Brain cells die from lack of oxygen. Blood thickens into sludge. Judgment becomes impaired. Coordination fails. People die in the death zone not from dramatic falls or avalanches, but from simply sitting down to rest and never getting back up. Their bodies giving up on the biological processes required for life. You're climbing in darkness again, the now familiar routine of headlamp and fixed rope. Except this time you're climbing toward 8,848 meters, toward the highest point on Earth's surface, toward an altitude where passenger jets cruise and humans aren't meant to exist. You're using supplemental oxygen now, breathing from a bottle that's strapped to your back and feeding through a mask that covers most of your face. The oxygen helps, definitely helps, but it doesn't make things easy or comfortable. You're still hypoxic even with the supplemental flow, still operating at a massive deficit. The oxygen just keeps you functional enough to keep moving. The tech entrepreneur is behind you, also on oxygen, moving in the shuffling, zombie-like gait that characterizes death zone climbing. You're managing his oxygen flow, monitoring his condition, making sure he stays clipped into the fixed line, basically functioning as his life support system. The South Col, at 7,900 meters, is a wind-swept plateau of rock and ice and frozen corpses. The bodies of dead climbers litter the upper mountain, too high and too dangerous to retrieve, preserved forever in the cold. You pass one such body now, frozen in a sitting position, still wearing the same type of down suit you're wearing, still attached to the fixed line they were clipped to when they decided to rest and never got up. The entrepreneur sees the body and stops, staring. And you have to physically push him to keep him moving, because stopping to contemplate mortality is a luxury that leads to becoming one more frozen corpse. The balcony, at 8,400 meters, offers a brief rest point and a chance to change oxygen bottles. You're already on your second bottle. The entrepreneur is burning through his faster because he's working harder, breathing harder, less efficient. You calculate the oxygen remaining versus distance to summit versus descent time, running the numbers that determine whether you continue or turn back. The math works, barely, assuming no delays, assuming the entrepreneur doesn't slow down further, assuming the weather holds. Too many assumptions, but that's high-altitude mountaineering in a nutshell. Controlled gambling with your life as the stake. Dawn is breaking as you approach the Hillary Step, or rather, where the Hillary Step used to be before the earthquake in 2015 changed the rock and ice configuration. This is the final technical challenge before the summit ridge, a nearly vertical section of rock and ice that's created a bottleneck. There are already climbers queued up, waiting their turn to ascend, burning through their oxygen supplies while they stand in place. This is the dark absurdity of modern Everest. You can die from traffic jams at 8,700 meters. Die from standing in line because some slower climber ahead of you is blocking the route. You're calculating the wait time, looking at the line, doing the oxygen math again, and it's not good. The entrepreneur is fading. You can see it in his movements, the way he's slumping forward, the glassy look in his eyes, visible through his goggles. You make the call that guides are sometimes forced to make. You're turning back. The summit isn't worth the entrepreneur's life or yours. He protests. Obviously, he's paid his $65,000. He's climbed for weeks. He's so close. But close doesn't matter in the death zone. Close is what gets you killed, and your job is to keep him alive, not to fulfill his bucket list dreams. You turn him around and start the descent, and he's fighting you initially. But his body is already checking out, the hypoxia making decisions for him. Descending is its own nightmare. Your legs are shaking from exhaustion, your oxygen is running low, and you're trying to get below 8,000 meters before your bottles run completely dry. The descent from the death zone is a controlled fall through states of consciousness that blur together into a nightmare of exhaustion and hypoxia. You're half carrying the entrepreneur now, his arm over your shoulder, his weight threatening to pull both of you down the mountain with every step. Your own oxygen ran out an hour ago, and you're back to breathing the thin, poisonous air of 8,000 meters. Your brain shutting down non-essential functions to conserve what little oxygen is making it to your cells. You can feel yourself becoming stupid, your thoughts moving through molasses, simple decisions requiring enormous mental effort. Clip into the next anchor point. Unclip from the previous one. Don't get the order wrong or you'll detach completely and slide down the Lhotse face until rocks or crevasses stop you permanently. Step. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Step. The entrepreneur is mumbling incoherently. Something about his metrics and his optimization protocols, his brain cooked by altitude and hypoxia into a state where past and present are mixing together. You've seen this before. Altitude-induced psychosis. People having conversations with dead relatives or convinced they're somewhere else entirely. Their oxygen-starved brains misfiring and creating false realities. You just keep him moving, keep him clipped in, keep dragging him downward toward thicker air and survival. By the time you reach Camp 3, you've been moving for 18 hours straight, and your body is shutting down in ways that are genuinely alarming. Your vision is tunneling, peripheral awareness just gone. You're navigating by instinct and muscle memory because your brain has stopped processing visual information properly. You collapse into the tent with the entrepreneur, and you know you should be doing things, checking his condition, getting fluids into both of you, changing oxygen bottles. But you physically cannot move. Your muscles have stopped accepting commands from your brain. They've gone on strike, and you lie there in a state that's not quite sleep and not quite consciousness, just existing in a gray zone where thought and sensation have become optional. You wake up, or maybe you've been awake the whole time. It's impossible to tell. To someone shaking you, another Sherpa checking on you, and apparently you've been non-responsive for 6 hours. 6 hours at 7,300 meters without oxygen, without water, without movement. You should probably be dead, or at minimum suffering from severe frostbite and hypothermia. But somehow you're not. Somehow your genetically enhanced altitude adaptation has kept your body functioning on autopilot, while your conscious mind checked out. The entrepreneur is in worse shape. His oxygen saturation is in the 60s, even with supplemental oxygen flowing. His lips are blue. His extremities are dangerously cold. The decision is made to evacuate him immediately. Get him down to Camp 2, where a helicopter can potentially extract him if the weather holds. You're in no condition to help with the evacuation. You can barely sit up. So other Sherpas take over, bundling the entrepreneur into a sleeping bag that will be dragged and carried down the mountain in a desperate rescue effort. You stay at Camp 3 another night, forcing yourself to drink water that tastes like plastic and metal, forcing yourself to eat energy gel that makes you want to vomit, rehydrating and refueling a body that has been running on empty for too long. The headache is spectacular now. The altitude headache combined with dehydration, combined with exhaustion, creating a symphony of pain that makes your skull feel like it's going to crack open. You've taken ibuprofen, but pain medication at altitude is a joke, barely touching the surface of the discomfort. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by the now familiar pattern of periodic breathing. Your autonomic nervous system forgetting how to maintain steady respiration, cycling between hyperventilation and complete cessation. Each time you stop breathing, you wake up gasping and panicked, your heart hammering, adrenaline flooding your system, and then you calm down enough to drift off again, only to repeat the cycle 30 minutes later. By morning, you've maybe accumulated 2 hours of actual sleep, but it's enough, combined with the rehydration and calories, to get you functional again. You begin your own descent, moving slowly but steadily, your body remembering how to do this, even though your mind is still foggy and slow. Back at Camp 2, you learn that the tech entrepreneur survived the helicopter evacuation and is currently recovering in a hospital in Kathmandu with severe frostbite to 3 fingers and both feet, plus altitude-related complications that will require weeks of treatment. He'll lose parts of some toes, probably, and his mountaineering career is over before it really began. But he's alive, which means you did your job. You feel nothing about this information, no relief or pride or satisfaction, just a dull acknowledgement that the outcome could have been worse. Emotional detachment is a survival mechanism at altitude. Caring too much about outcomes will break you. So you learn to treat clients as problems to be solved, rather than people with lives and families and dreams. It's not cruel, it's necessary. The psychological armor that lets you keep doing this work season after season. You're assigned a new client for the second summit attempt. The surgeon from Australia who turned back with you when the entrepreneur failed. She's competent, experienced, and realistic about her chances, which makes her both a better client and, paradoxically, more likely to die. Because competent people push themselves harder and make more aggressive decisions. You spend 2 days at Camp 2 recovering, eating as much as your altitude-suppressed appetite allows, forcing down calories in the form of chocolate bars and nuts and freeze-dried meals that all taste like nothing. Your body weight is dropping despite the calorie intake, your muscle mass being consumed for energy, your face becoming gaunt and angular, your limbs thinning. This is normal. Everyone loses weight in the death zone. Your body simply cannot maintain itself at extreme altitude. It can only manage a controlled deterioration. The weather window is narrowing. The jet stream is dipping lower, bringing winds that would make summit attempts suicidal. But there's a predicted gap, 36 hours where the winds might drop enough to make a push possible. Every expedition at base camp is watching the same weather models, making the same calculations, and the decision is made simultaneously across multiple teams. Go now or pack up for the season. You climb to Camp 3 again, and this time the lots of face feels familiar, almost routine, which is a dangerous mindset because the mountain hasn't changed. It's still trying to kill you. Familiarity is just your brain lying to you about the danger. The surgeon is moving well. Steady pace, good breathing rhythm, managing her energy efficiently. You're impressed despite yourself, despite your policy of emotional detachment. Because competence is worth noting even if it doesn't guarantee survival. Camp 3 to Camp 4 is a brutal push, crossing the South Col in afternoon winds that are strong enough to knock you sideways, strong enough to make you question the weather forecast that promised improving conditions. Camp 4 sits at 7,950 meters in the death zone proper, and the camp is a collection of tents being systematically destroyed by wind, fabric shredding, poles bending, everything held together by guy lines and desperation. You secure the surgeon in her tent, check her oxygen supply, make sure she understands the timeline, rest for 4 hours, then begin the summit push at 11 p.m. Reach the summit by dawn, descend immediately. Don't stop for photos or celebration or anything except survival. She nods. She understands. She's done her research and knows the statistics of who dies and why. Most deaths on Everest happen during descent. People who summited successfully but then ran out of oxygen or energy or time on the way down. Or people who summited in deteriorating weather and got trapped above 8,000 meters. The 4 hours of rest is another exercise in not quite sleeping. Your body too amped on adrenaline and altitude to fully relax. Your mind racing through contingencies and scenarios. You're checking and rechecking your gear, your oxygen bottles, your headlamp batteries, the attachment points on your harness. Because equipment failure in the death zone is a death sentence, and redundancy is the only insurance policy that matters. The wind is screaming outside, hammering the tent with a violence that makes you wonder if the whole structure is going to rip away and send you tumbling across the South Col. But the tent holds, the guy lines hold, and eventually your watch alarm goes off, and it's time to start climbing again. The second summit attempt begins in conditions that are technically acceptable but far from ideal. Winds gusting to 40 kilometers per hour. Temperature at negative 40 degrees Celsius before wind chill. And you're climbing into darkness that feels more hostile than usual. Like the mountain has decided to stop tolerating human presence. The line of climbers is longer this time. More expeditions making their attempts simultaneously. And you're part of a slow-moving queue of headlamps ascending toward the balcony. The surgeon is moving well, maintaining pace, not wasting energy on talking or unnecessary movement, just climbing with mechanical efficiency. You're monitoring her closely, watching for signs of deterioration. But she's holding strong, her preparation and fitness paying dividends. At the balcony, you change oxygen bottles in winds that make the simple mechanical task feel like defusing a bomb. Your frozen fingers struggling with regulators and connections, the penalty for dropping a bottle being that it's gone forever, tumbled down the mountain, and with it goes your safety margin. You complete the bottle change successfully, check the surgeon's bottle, and continue upward toward the south summit. This is the section where things start to get genuinely desperate. The altitude is now severe enough that your brain is actively dying, cells starving for oxygen, and beginning to shut down. Your judgment becoming impaired in ways you're not fully aware of. You know you're impaired. Intellectually, you understand this. But you can't perceive the specific ways your thinking has become compromised, which creates a terrifying feedback loop of uncertainty. The surgeon asks you a question, something about the route ahead, and you realize you didn't process the words, just heard sounds, and you have to ask her to repeat it. And even then, it takes you several seconds to formulate a response. Your language centers struggling with the hypoxia. The south summit offers a brief flat section, a psychological relief from the constant upward struggle. And here you can see the true summit, still 200 vertical meters above, connected by a knife-edge ridge with 1,000-meter drops on both sides. The ridge is the crux, the section that separates dilettantes from summiteers, where the exposure and technical difficulty combine with extreme altitude to create a filter that only the strong or lucky pass through. You're clipped into the fixed line, moving along the ridge in a state of hyper-focus, because a single mistake here, a crampon catching on the rope or a moment of inattention, could send you sliding down either the Kangzheng face or the southwest face, both of which are unsurvivable falls. The surgeon is moving more slowly now, the altitude and exposure getting to her, and you're close behind, ready to clip her through the anchor transitions, ready to catch her if she stumbles. Dawn is breaking as you approach the Hillary Steps' new configuration, and the light is revealing the true scale of the exposure. The vastness of the drops on either side, Tibet on one side, Nepal on the other, and you're balanced on the seam between them. The queue at the step is shorter this time, only a few climbers ahead, and you're calculating oxygen supplies while you wait. Running the numbers again, and the math is tight but workable if you summit in the next hour and descend immediately. The surgeon goes up the step with surprising speed, her technical climbing skills evident even in the death zone. And you follow. And then you're on the summit ridge, the final 100 meters of climbing. And the sun is hitting the prayer flags that mark the summit. And the surgeon is crying inside her oxygen mask, tears freezing on her face. Because she's going to make it. She's actually going to stand on top of the world. The summit of Mount Everest is a space approximately the size of a dining room table. A small plateau of snow and ice marked by prayer flags from dozens of expeditions, frozen offerings, religious artifacts, and the detritus of human ambition. You've been here 7 times before, and it never gets more impressive or meaningful. It's just a point on a map, the highest point certainly, but still just geography. The surgeon is taking photos, the obligatory summit photos with arms raised and flags displayed, evidence for the people back home that she actually made it. You're taking photos too, because that's part of your job, documenting client success. But you're also constantly checking the time, checking the weather, calculating descent windows. You've been on the summit for 6 minutes, which is already longer than you're comfortable with. But the surgeon has paid for this moment and deserves to experience it. So you give her another 4 minutes before you tell her it's time to leave. She nods. She understands. The summit is only halfway. Descent is where people die. And she starts down immediately without argument, which is the mark of a good client and possibly the reason she'll survive this. The descent begins in good conditions, clear weather, light winds, excellent visibility, and you're making good time down the summit ridge. The surgeon moving carefully but steadily. Her adrenaline and emotion from summiting giving her a temporary energy boost. But energy boosts at 8,800 meters are borrowed energy, debt that will come due with interest, and you're watching for the moment when she crashes, when the adrenaline wears off and the profound exhaustion underneath reasserts itself. The crash comes at the south summit, her movement suddenly becoming sluggish, her responses to your instructions delayed. And you know you're now in the dangerous phase where client management becomes client rescue. You're clipping her through anchor transitions now, checking each connection yourself rather than trusting her to do it. Because hypoxic people make stupid mistakes, forget steps, clip into the wrong things. She's moving like a drunk person, stumbling, catching herself, overcorrecting, and you're right behind her, hands ready to grab her harness if she goes down. The balcony feels like it takes hours to reach, though it's probably only 90 minutes, time distortion being another gift of extreme altitude. And here you change oxygen bottles again, putting her on her last bottle, which needs to get her down to Camp 4 where more oxygen waits. Your own oxygen is running low. You're rationing it, taking hits when you absolutely need it, and breathing ambient air the rest of the time, because you're adapted and you can suffer through it, and the surgeon can't. This is the calculus of Sherpa work. You absorb the suffering so the client doesn't have to. You take the risk so they can be safe. You use up your margins so they can maintain theirs. Down through the cornice traverse, careful footwork required here because the cornice can collapse, sending climbers down the Kangshung face, and several bodies are still down there from exactly this scenario. The surgeon is barely responsive now, following your commands but not initiating any movement. And you're essentially puppeteering her down the mountain, telling her where to step, when to clip, when to breathe. Camp 4 appears below, the tents looking simultaneously welcoming and inadequate. Shelter that's barely shelter. But it's below 8,000 meters, just barely. And that means you're out of the death zone proper, into the merely very dangerous zone. You get the surgeon into her tent, onto her sleeping pad. Check her extremities for frostbite and find some concerning pale patches on her nose and cheeks, but nothing that looks like deep tissue damage. You get her oxygen flowing from a fresh bottle, get some warm liquid into her, and then you collapse yourself, your job done for the moment. The surgeon alive and successfully summited, which means this counts as a good day in the brutal accounting of high-altitude guiding. The descent from Camp 4 to base camp should be triumphant, a celebration of successful summit and survival. But instead, it's a grueling multi-day slog through diminishing altitude and accumulated exhaustion. Your body has been operating in crisis mode for weeks now. And even though you're descending into thicker air, you're not recovering. You're just deteriorating more slowly. The surgeon needs assistance down the Lhasa face. Her legs are shaking with exhaustion. Her coordination is shot. And what should be a straightforward descent on fixed ropes becomes an exercise in constant vigilance, making sure she doesn't make a fatal mistake through simple tiredness. You're not much better off. Your own exhaustion manifesting as tunnel vision and slowed reaction times. But you're functional enough to keep both of you safe, which is the only metric that matters. Camp 3, Camp 2, Camp 1. Each a waypoint in the descent, each offering slightly better air and slightly better sleep and slightly better food. But the recovery is glacially slow. Your body has been so thoroughly depleted that simply breathing thicker air isn't enough to restore function. At Camp 2, you sleep for 14 hours straight, a deep, unconscious sleep that's more like your body shutting down for emergency maintenance than actual rest. And when you wake up, your joints have locked up from the prolonged immobility, and it takes 15 minutes of agonizing movement to get them functional again. The descent through the Khumbu Icefall one final time is an exercise in gratitude and terror. Gratitude that you're leaving the death zone behind. Terror that the icefall could still kill you in the final hours after you've survived everything else. The glacier has shifted since you last crossed it. New crevasses have opened. Old snow bridges have collapsed. And the route has been remarked, but the new route isn't necessarily safer, just different. You're moving as fast as safety allows, because time in the icefall is exposure to catastrophic risk, and you want that exposure minimized. The surgeon is moving well now, the thicker air and proximity to safety giving her energy. And you make it through the icefall in good time, no incidents, no close calls, just competent movement through lethal terrain, which is the best outcome available in this environment. Base camp appears below, and you can see people moving around, hear generators running, smell cooking food. And the surgeon is crying again, different tears this time, relief and joy and exhaustion all mixed together. You're not crying. You never cry. Emotion at altitude is a luxury you learned to suppress years ago. But you feel something approximating relief. A small acknowledgement that you did the job successfully and everyone is alive. The expedition leader meets you at the camp edge, congratulating the surgeon, thanking you for the successful summit. And you nod and smile and play your role. But inside, you're already calculating how much money you made this season, how long it needs to last, whether you can afford to take next season off, or whether you'll need to come back and do this all over again. The surgeon gives you a tip, a significant tip actually, several $100s in cash that represents genuine appreciation and also represents maybe 2 months of living expenses for your family. And you're grateful. You are. But you're also aware of the fundamental imbalance in the transaction. She paid $65,000 for an experience. You risked your life repeatedly for maybe $6,000 total, including the tip. And society considers this arrangement normal and fair. Base camp after a successful summit rotation is a strange mix of celebration and exhaustion. People who made it drinking and sharing stories. People who didn't make it packing up to leave early. And the Sherpas who made it all possible already thinking about the next season or the next client or the medical bills from this season's injuries. You spend 3 days at base camp, nominally resting but actually doing the work of breaking down camps, recovering gear from the mountain, helping other expeditions with their descents. Because Sherpa work doesn't end when your client summits. It ends when everything and everyone is safely off the mountain. You're helping to dismantle Camp 3 when you get the news. One of the other Sherpas, a guy named Pemba, who you've worked with for 5 seasons, fell into a crevasse while breaking down Camp 2 and died before they could get him out. The crevasse was hidden under fresh snow. He stepped on what looked like solid ground and dropped 30 meters into the glacier. And by the time they got ropes down to him, he'd already died from impact injuries. 32 years old, 3 kids, widow who now has no income. And he died doing cleanup work, not even during the glory of a summit push. Just mundane logistical work that clients never see or think about. His body will be brought down tomorrow, carried by other Sherpas who will volunteer their time because that's what you do. You take care of your own community because nobody else will. The funeral ceremonies will happen in his village, and there will be a collection to support his family. And life will continue because death in the mountains is so common, it barely registers as tragedy anymore. Just another data point in the ongoing statistics of who pays the real price for tourism and adventure. You attend the prayer ceremony at base camp, monks chanting for Pemba's soul, incense burning in the thin air. And you're surrounded by other Sherpas. And nobody is crying because crying is what you do later, in private. Not in front of the clients and expedition leaders who are watching with respectful curiosity. The ceremony is beautiful, traditional, meaningful, and also completely inadequate compensation for a life lost, for children who no longer have a father, for a wife who no longer has a husband, for all the summits Pemba will never guide and stories he'll never tell. After the ceremony, you sit with some other Sherpas, drinking tea, talking about Pemba, remembering his laugh and his bad jokes and the time he carried a client's entire pack, plus his own, through the icefall because the client was having a breakdown. You're also talking about the industry, the way expedition companies treat Sherpas as expendable infrastructure, the way insurance policies pay out less for Sherpa deaths than Western climber deaths, the way credit for summits goes to clients and expedition leaders, while Sherpas are footnotes in the adventure narratives. There's anger in the anger in conversation, but it's tired anger, resigned anger, because everyone at this table has been having the same conversation for years and nothing changes. Mountaineering tourism is what it is. And you can either participate and accept the terms or walk away and return to subsistence farming. And most people at this table have families to feed and bills to pay, so walking away isn't really an option. You think about Pemba's kids, and you think about your own younger brother who just started guiding. And you think about the actuarial reality that every season you work increases the probability that you'll be the one falling into a crevasse, or getting swept by an avalanche, or sitting down in the death zone and never getting up. But thinking about it doesn't change it. So you finish your tea and return to work, because there's still gear to recover and camps to dismantle and clients who need assistance getting down to Lukla for their flights back to Kathmandu, and their lives that will continue, enriched by their Everest experience, while yours continues as it always has. One season at a time, one risk at a time, one paycheck at a time. The trek from base camp back to Lukla reverses your ascent journey, dropping through the same villages and landscapes. But everything looks different now. Or maybe you're different. Burned out and hollowed by weeks at altitude. Your body running on fumes and stubbornness. You're descending with a group of Sherpas, not attached to any particular client anymore. The surgeon having already helicoptered out to Kathmandu for faster return and treatment of her minor frostbite. The weight on your back is lighter now, just your personal gear and some equipment that needs to be returned to Kathmandu. But your knees are screaming with every downward step. The accumulated damage from weeks of carrying massive loads making the descent an exercise in pain management. You're popping ibuprofen like candy. And you know you should probably get your knees properly examined, maybe get an MRI. But proper medical care costs money and time, and you'll probably just tape them up and hope they hold for another season. The villages you pass through are the same, but you're seeing them with different eyes now. Noticing the new lodges being built, the expanding infrastructure of tourism, the satellite dishes and solar panels appearing on traditional houses. The money from mountaineering is changing the Khumbu region, bringing development and opportunity. But it's also bringing dependence on an industry that's fundamentally extractive. Taking the labor and risk of Sherpas and converting it into adventure experiences for wealthy Westerners. You stop in Namche Bazaar for the night, and the lodge is full of trekkers heading up for base camp treks. Younger people, gap year students, adventure tourists, all fresh and excited and taking photos of everything. They look so clean, so well fed, so unburdened by the realities of what happens higher up the mountain. And you remember being that young once, before you started guiding, when the mountains were still romantic and the danger was theoretical. Now the danger is biographical, written into your body in compressed vertebrae and damaged knees and lungs that wheeze in the cold. And romance has been replaced by economics, the simple calculation of risk versus reward versus necessity. One of the trekkers approaches you in the dining hall, recognizes you as a Sherpa, asks if you've climbed Everest, and you say yes 7 times. And she's amazed, wants to take a photo with you, wants to hear about the summit experience. You oblige because refusing would be rude, but you give her the sanitized version, the one about breathtaking views and personal achievement and the majesty of the Himalayas. Not the version about watching people die and carrying clients who should have turned back and losing friends to crevasses during cleanup work. She thanks you, tells you you're so brave, tells you the Sherpa people are incredible, and she means it genuinely. But there's something in the compliment that makes you uncomfortable, the way it exoticizes your labor, turns necessity into mystique, transforms economic survival into cultural destiny. You finish your meal, retire to the room you're sharing with 3 other Sherpas, and the conversation turns to plans for the off-season. Who's going to work as a trekking guide for the autumn season? Who's taking time off to recover? Who's looking at construction work in Kathmandu because guiding alone doesn't pay enough? Your own plan is to return to your village, help with the potato harvest, spend time with your family, rest your body as much as possible, and hope that your knees hold together long enough to make it through 1 more season, because you need 3 more good seasons to finish paying for your family's new house and your nephew's school fees. 3 more seasons of gambling with death. 3 more seasons of carrying loads that are destroying your spine. 3 more seasons of breathing air so thin it kills brain cells. And if you make it through, if luck holds and the mountain doesn't take you, then maybe you can transition to a lower altitude guiding job, or get work with an expedition company that doesn't require field work, some office job in Kathmandu that uses your mountain experience without requiring you to actually risk your life anymore. Lukla Airport is chaos. A tiny strip of tarmac perched on a mountainside with a runway that slopes upward to help planes stop and slopes downward to help them take off. Repeatedly ranked as one of the most dangerous airports in the world and absolutely living up to that reputation. You're waiting for a flight to Kathmandu that's already been delayed 4 hours due to weather. And the waiting area is packed with trekkers and climbers and Sherpas, all in various states of cleanliness and exhaustion. The air here at 2,800 meters feels luxuriously thick after weeks above 5,000 meters. And you can feel your body starting to recover, your headache finally fading, your appetite returning, your sleep deepening. But you can also feel all the damage you've accumulated, the persistent cough from weeks of breathing dry, frozen air, the deep bone ache in your joints, the strange numbness in 2 of your toes that might be nerve damage from minor frostbite. These are the normal costs of a season, the price you pay for the money you've earned, and you're mentally tallying both sides of the ledger. $6,000 earned, minus equipment costs, minus food and lodging not covered by the expedition, minus the money you're sending home. Leaves you with maybe $4,500 clear, which needs to last for the off-season and pay for accumulated expenses and hopefully leave some savings for emergencies. $4,500 for risking your life repeatedly over 3 months, for destroying your body incrementally, for losing another friend to a crevasse. The math doesn't work, not really, but it's still better math than any other option available to you, which is the fundamental trap of Sherpa work. It's terrible compensation for unreasonable risk, but it's still the best compensation available. The flight to Kathmandu finally boards. A small twin-prop plane that holds maybe 15 people, and you're crammed in with trekkers who are talking excitedly about their experiences, already crafting the narratives they'll tell at home, the adversity they overcame, the personal growth they achieved. You're listening to them talk about how hard the trek was, how challenging the altitude, how they really pushed themselves. And you're biting your tongue because what they experienced as challenge, you experienced as commute. The route to base camp being the easy part of your job, the part where nothing dangerous happened yet. But pointing this out would be rude and accomplish nothing. So you smile and nod when they include you in their conversation. Play the role of the humble Sherpa who is honored to have helped them achieve their dreams, which is what they expect and what maintains the social fiction that makes the tourism industry function. The plane takes off, and Lukla's terrifying runway drops away below. And you're flying over the landscape you just spent weeks walking through, seeing it compressed from altitude, the whole journey reduced to a 40-minute flight. The dichotomy is striking. Tourists fly in and out, treating the mountains as a recreational destination, while you walk in and out, treating them as a workplace and a hazard. Same geography, completely different relationships to the space, completely different stakes. Kathmandu appears below, sprawling and polluted and loud and wonderful. Civilization in all its chaotic glory. And the plane descends into Tribhuvan International Airport, where your family's waiting to meet you because you're one of the lucky ones. You survived another season. You're coming home intact. Your wife is there with your 2 children, and your kids are running towards you, and you're picking them up despite your screaming back, because this is what you did it for. This moment right here, being able to provide for them, being able to afford their education and their food and their future. Your wife is scanning your face, looking for signs of damage. And you know she's relieved to see you, but also already dreading the next season, already calculating how many more times you can do this before luck runs out. Your village is a 2-hour drive from Kathmandu, up winding mountain roads that make you carsick after weeks of walking at altitude. Your body's equilibrium completely thrown off by the motion of vehicles. The village is small, maybe 300 people. Traditional stone houses with slate roofs, terraced fields climbing the hillsides, prayer flags everywhere. And it's home in a way that base camp or the death zone will never be, no matter how many seasons you spend there. Your house is newish, 3 years old, the reason you've been guiding so intensely. And it's a good house, solid stone construction with a metal roof. Glass windows that actually keep the cold out. Enough rooms for your family to have some privacy. Your parents live next door in the old family house, and they're waiting when you arrive. Your mother already crying because you're home safe. Your father looking you over with the practiced eye of someone who has seen too many climbers return damaged or not return at all. Your father was a porter in his younger years, carried loads for early expeditions back when mountaineering was less commercial and more exploratory. And he knows exactly what you've been doing and exactly what it costs. And he's proud of you and worried about you in equal measure. The first few days home are disorienting, your body and mind struggling to adjust to the absence of danger, to the luxury of warm shelter and regular meals and sleep that isn't interrupted by periodic breathing. You're sleeping 12, 14 hours a night. Your body desperately trying to recover from weeks of accumulated sleep debt and altitude damage. Your appetite is enormous, and your mother is feeding you constantly. Traditional foods that taste like childhood and safety. Dal bhat, momos, thukpa, all prepared with a care and love that only your mother's cooking can have. You're gaining back the weight you lost, the hollow, gaunt look fading from your face, color returning to your skin. But the damage isn't all reversible. Your cough persists, a deep, rattling thing that brings up stuff you don't want to examine too closely. Probably damage to your lung tissue from weeks of breathing frozen air and altitude. Your knees are a constant problem, swelling and stiffness, that makes climbing stairs difficult, makes working in the fields painful. And you know you need to see a doctor, get them properly examined. But you're putting it off because you're afraid of what you'll learn. Afraid that a doctor will tell you that you can't guide anymore, that your body's done, that you need to find some other way to support your family. Your wife knows you're avoiding it, knows you're in pain, and she's worried but also practical. Because someone needs to think about the long term. Someone needs to plan for the possibility that your body gives out before you've saved enough to transition to something safer. She's been working while you were gone, doing tailoring for other families in the village, making maybe $50 a month, which helps, but isn't enough to support the family on its own. She wants you to consider other options. Maybe training as a trekking guide for lower altitude routes. Maybe getting work with an expedition company in logistics rather than field work. Maybe starting a small business in Kathmandu using your connections in the tourism industry. All reasonable suggestions, all requiring either capital you don't have or skills you haven't developed or connections that are harder to leverage than they sound. You're 32 years old, and you've been guiding at altitude since you were 23. And it's the only work you're really qualified for, the only work that pays enough to make a difference. The idea of starting over in something new is terrifying, more terrifying than the Khumbu Icefall in some ways, because at least you understand the mountain's dangers, you know how to navigate them. But navigating the economy without the advantage of your altitude adaptation and hard-won experience, that's unknown territory. The village Gompa, or monastery, sits at the edge of the settlement, a small building that serves as the spiritual center for the community. And you find yourself going there more often than you used to. Not because you've become more religious exactly, but because the rituals and prayers offer something like peace, a framework for processing the accumulated trauma and death you've witnessed. The head monk, an old man named Lama Tenzing, who has known you since you were a child, sees right through your performance of normalcy, recognizes the signs of someone carrying too much, and he invites you to sit with him, drink tea, talk about the season. You find yourself telling him about Pemba's death, about the tech entrepreneur nearly dying from your failure to turn him back earlier, about the queue of people burning oxygen while they wait to summit, about the bodies frozen in the death zone that you passed like trail markers. He listens without judgment, without trying to fix anything, just bearing witness to your experience. And when you finish, he talks about impermanence, about the Buddhist understanding that all things pass, that suffering is universal, that attachment to outcomes creates additional suffering beyond what's necessary. It's philosophical comfort, not practical help. But there's something valuable in the acknowledgement, in having someone who understands that what you're doing isn't just physically dangerous, but spiritually corrosive. That watching people die and carrying clients who are willing to risk Sherpa lives for summit photos does something to your understanding of human nature and your place in the world. He performs a blessing for you, prayer for protection in future seasons, prayer for the souls of those who died on the mountain, prayer for your family's well-being, and you participate in the ritual with genuine feeling, even though part of you knows that prayers don't stop avalanches or make crevasses visible or change the economics that drive you back to the mountain season after season. After the blessing, you walk through the village, greeting neighbors, catching up on local news, hearing about marriages and births and deaths that happened while you were gone. The normal flow of village life that continues regardless of whether you're there or absent. Your nephew, your brother's son, is 12 years old, and he asks you about Everest with the wide-eyed enthusiasm of a kid who doesn't understand the reality yet, who sees only the adventure and glory, not the grinding danger and exploitation. You find yourself trying to steer him away from mountaineering work, suggesting he focus on his education, think about university, consider careers that don't involve risking his life. But even as you're saying it, you know you sound like a hypocrite. Because you did exactly what he's dreaming of doing. And if the economic circumstances don't change, he'll probably end up doing it too. Because what else is available for young men in the Khumbu region with limited education and unlimited proximity to the tourist industry? The potato harvest begins, and you're working in the fields with your family, digging up potatoes from the rocky soil, your back and knees screaming in protest. Because apparently you can survive the Lhotse face, but farm work is beyond your damaged body's capacity. It's absurd, and it makes you laugh, this inversion where office workers treat Everest as the ultimate physical challenge, while you find basic agriculture excruciating. Your father works alongside you, moving more slowly than he used to, but still functional. And you're very aware that you're looking at your future. If you're lucky, if you survive the next few seasons, you'll age into the same reduced mobility, the same chronic pain, the same body worn out by decades of hard labor in harsh conditions. If you're unlucky, you won't age at all. You'll just become another statistic, another Sherpa who died supporting someone else's adventure. Another name in the growing list of casualties that the mountaineering industry acknowledges with brief sadness, and then immediately moves past because the next season is coming. And there are always more climbers who need guides and always more young Sherpas willing to take the risk. The off-season passes in a blur of recovery and anxiety. Your body's slowly healing while your mind races through financial calculations and worst-case scenarios. The money you brought back is being consumed faster than you'd like. School fees for your kids, medical expenses for your mother who has developed diabetes and needs medication, repairs to the house where the monsoon damaged part of the roof, contributions to Pemba's widow and children, because that's what the community does when someone dies on the mountain. By the time autumn arrives, your savings are depleted enough that the next season isn't optional anymore. It's mandatory, regardless of whether your knees have fully recovered or your lungs have stopped producing that alarming rattle when you breathe deeply. You travel back to Kathmandu in late February to begin preparations for the spring climbing season, connecting with the expedition company you've worked with for the past 4 years, signing contracts that are deliberately vague about liability and compensation, attending the mandatory safety briefings that everyone knows are primarily about protecting the company from lawsuits, rather than protecting Sherpas from death. The briefings cover crevasse rescue, avalanche safety, altitude illness recognition, all useful information delivered in a format that assumes you don't already know it intimately from lived experience. The Western guides running the briefings are competent, experienced, and completely oblivious to the condescension inherent in teaching Sherpas about mountain safety, like teaching fish about swimming. You sit through it politely because arguing accomplishes nothing and might cost you the job. And you need the job. So you nod and take notes and pretend this information is new and valuable. The expedition company has expanded this year, taking on more clients, which means more summits to support, more camps to stock, more carries through the Icefall, more risk distributed across more Sherpas. the financial logic is clear. Each additional client is almost pure profit for the company, since the marginal cost of adding one more person to an existing expedition is minimal. Just another tent, another oxygen allocation, another Sherpa to guide them. For the company, it's scaling efficiency. For you, it's scaling danger. More traffic on the mountain, more incompetent climbers clogging the route. More chances for something to go catastrophically wrong. You're assigned to a client before you even reach base camp, a banker from London who has done extensive altitude training and seems physically capable, but also has the kind of aggressive confidence that makes you nervous. Confidence at altitude is a liability. It makes people push past their limits, ignore warning signs, take risks that prudent climbers avoid. You've learned to prefer scared clients, people who are aware of the danger and respect it. Because fear keeps you cautious, and caution keeps you alive. But you don't get to choose your clients, you get assigned. And your job is to manage whatever combination of fitness and psychology shows up, to keep them alive, despite themselves, if necessary. The trek to base camp begins again, the same route you've walked dozens of times. And it should feel routine by now, but instead it feels ominous. Like walking towards something inevitable and unwelcome. Your knees are complaining from the first day, the months of rest not enough to fully heal the accumulated damage. And you're back on ibuprofen, back to managing pain as a constant background condition of work. The other Sherpas on the trek are a mix of veterans like yourself and younger guys doing their first or second season. And you can see yourself in the younger ones, the enthusiasm and optimism not yet ground down by experience. The belief that they're different, that they'll be the ones who make good money and get out clean. You don't have the heart to tell them the truth, that almost nobody gets out clean, that the mountain takes something from everyone who works there. If not your life, then your health. If not your health, then your peace of mind. If not your peace of mind, then your faith in the fairness of the world. Base camp is more crowded than you've ever seen it. A sprawling tent city that has metastasized across the glacier, expeditions packed in so tightly that you can hear conversations from neighboring camps, smell their cooking, navigate by the glow of their generator lights. The commercialization has reached a peak that feels unsustainable. Over 300 people attempting Everest this season, which means over 300 people will be funneling through the same fixed ropes, crossing the same ladder bridges, queuing at the same bottlenecks. The Icefall doctors, the team of Sherpas responsible for maintaining the route through the Khumbu Icefall, are overwhelmed by the traffic, constantly repairing damaged ropes, replacing broken ladders, adjusting the route as the glacier shifts. You're part of the Icefall team this season, which is both an honor because it's skilled specialized work and a death sentence, because it requires spending enormous amounts of time in the most dangerous section of the mountain. The work begins immediately, before clients even arrive, establishing the route from scratch because the glacier has moved significantly over the winter. Old anchors pulled out, old ladders buried or destroyed. You're working in teams of 4, moving through the icefall in the pre-dawn cold, drilling ice screws, stringing rope, lashing ladders across crevasses that seem wider this year, deeper, more numerous. Climate change is accelerating glacial movement, making the icefall more unstable, more unpredictable, more deadly. But the climbing season continues because the economics demand it. Because too many people's livelihoods depend on the flow of clients up and down the mountain. You're spanning a crevasse that requires 5 ladders lashed together an absurd distance. And you're testing the connection points while trying not to think about the fact that hundreds of people will cross this bridge. That each crossing stresses the aluminum and the lashings and the anchor points. That eventually something will fail and someone will fall, and it might be you, or it might be someone you know, or it might be a client who paid $65,000 and whose family will sue the expedition company, who will blame the Sherpas for inadequate maintenance. The lawsuit part isn't your problem directly. The expedition company handles that. But the guilt part is the knowledge that if your work fails, people die. And unlike clients who chose this risk for recreation, you're doing this work for survival, which somehow makes the moral calculus even more twisted. A sea rack collapses 200 meters from where you're working, the crash echoing through the ice fall like thunder. And everyone stops, looks, calculates whether the collapse is isolated or the beginning of a larger failure. The collapse is isolated this time, and work continues. But your heart rate takes 20 minutes to return to normal. Adrenaline flooding your system in response to a danger that was close enough to kill you, but didn't. The near miss that defines icefall work. You're back at base camp by noon, the route for the lower icefall established. And you're exhausted in a way that's already familiar. The deep tiredness that comes from working at altitude under stress, knowing that tomorrow you'll do it again, and the day after, and the day after, until the route is complete, the season can begin in earnest. The banker client arrives that afternoon, fresh from a helicopter flight, looking fit and confident and completely unprepared for what's coming despite all his altitude training and preparation. He introduces himself, shakes your hand with a grip that's trying to communicate something about his character, starts telling you about his training regimen and his goals for the climb. You listen politely, making the appropriate, encouraging sounds. But internally, you're already assessing. Fitness level good. Confidence level concerning. Listening skills poor, based on how much he's talking versus asking questions. He'll be a handful. Probably push too hard, resist turning back if conditions warrant it. Need constant management to keep him from killing himself. Just another client. Just another season. Just another roll of the dice with your life as the stake. The acclimatization rotations begin with the usual pattern. Base camp to Camp 1 through the icefall. Rest, return to base camp. Repeat at increasing elevations. Except this season, the icefall feels different, more active, more hostile. Seracs groaning and shifting constantly, new cracks appearing overnight, the route requiring daily adjustments. You're making your third carry through the icefall when it happens. You're crossing one of the 5 ladder bridges you installed, moving carefully, when you hear the crack. That distinctive sound of ice, failing under stress. The serac anchoring your ladder bridge is calving, massive blocks of ice beginning to separate from the main structure. And you have maybe 3 seconds to make a decision. Try to finish crossing the remaining 20 meters of ladder or retreat back to the near side. You choose forward, sprinting across the flexing aluminum in crampons, which is insane. Running on ladder rungs is how you miss a step and fall. But staying in place means being on the bridge when the serac collapses and takes the whole structure down. You make it across with 1 second to spare. Literally 1 second before the entire serac face comes down. Thousands of tons of ice crashing into the crevasse, severing the ladder bridge, sending a shock wave through the glacier that knocks you off your feet. You're lying on the ice, heart hammering, ears ringing from the impact, and you're alive, but the route is gone, destroyed. And you need to radio base camp, get the Icefall team mobilized, establish a new route around the collapsed section. The work of rebuilding takes 2 days. 2 days of hauling new ladders into the icefall, finding new anchor points, testing new configurations, all while knowing that the same thing could happen again tomorrow or an hour from now. Because the glacier doesn't care about your schedule or your safety or the hundreds of clients waiting to make their attempts. The banker client, meanwhile, is getting impatient, complaining about delays, worried about his summit window. And you want to tell him that the delay is because the mountain tried to kill you, that the Icefall team is literally rebuilding the highway to his dreams while risking their lives. But instead, you give him platitudes about safety and proper acclimatization and trust in the process. The first rotation to Camp 1 goes smoothly, the banker moving well despite his constant narration for his helmet camera. And you're starting to think maybe you misjudged him. Maybe the confidence is earned. But then at Camp 1, he starts having altitude headache, nothing serious, normal AMS symptoms. And instead of acknowledging it and adjusting his pace, he takes painkillers and tries to hide the symptoms because he doesn't want to be seen as weak or unable to handle the altitude. This is how people die, this exact pattern. Ego overriding judgment, painkillers masking warning signs, pushing through symptoms that should trigger dissent. You confront him directly. Tell him that hiding symptoms is grounds for immediate removal from the expedition, that you're not interested in getting him killed or getting yourself killed trying to rescue him. And he's taken aback by your directness, clearly expecting the humble, deferential Sherpa act. But you're too old and too tired for that performance. And if directness saves his life, then it's worth the risk of offending him. He acknowledges the headache, agrees to monitor symptoms, agrees to be honest about his condition, and you descend back to base camp together. The first rotation complete, both of you alive, which counts as success in the grim arithmetic of high-altitude guiding. Back at base camp, you learn that another expedition had a close call in the Icefall. A ladder bridge collapse that dropped 2 Sherpas into a crevasse. Both rescued, but one with a broken leg that ends his season and possibly his career. The injured Sherpa is someone you know casually, worked with on a previous season. And the news hits harder than it should, maybe because you know how easily that could have been you 2 days ago. How luck and timing are the only things separating the injured from the uninjured, the dead from the living. The second acclimatization rotation takes you to Camp 2. And the banker is performing better now, having learned to respect the symptoms and manage his ego, which improves his chances of summiting considerably. Camp 2 is where the real suffering begins, where altitude starts to have serious effects even on adapted bodies, where sleep becomes impossible and food becomes torture and every minor task requires enormous effort. You're melting snow for water, a process that at this altitude takes forever because water boils at a lower temperature and thus doesn't get as hot and thus melts snow less efficiently. And you're watching the pot like it's the most important thing in the world because letting it boil dry would waste precious fuel. The banker is in his tent, dealing with his own altitude misery. And you're alone with your thoughts for the first time in days, which is dangerous because your thoughts at altitude tend toward the morbid and catastrophic. You're thinking about Pemba again, about the randomness of his death, about how cleanup work killed him after he survived dozens of summit rotations. You're thinking about the injured Sherpa from the Icefall, about whether his family will be okay, whether the expedition company will cover his medical costs, or whether he'll be left with debt and disability. You're thinking about your own family, about what would happen to them if you don't come back this season, whether the small life insurance policy would be enough, whether your wife could manage, whether your kids would remember you or just know you as the father who died on the mountain, like so many others. The water finally boils. You make tea and rehydrate some freeze-dried meal that tastes like absolutely nothing. And you force it down because your body needs calories, even though your appetite has disappeared into the thin air. The night at Camp 2 is the usual nightmare of periodic breathing and altitude headache and cold that penetrates every layer, and you're lying there thinking about how you've done this so many times that it should be routine. But it never becomes routine. It's always miserable, always a struggle, always a test of whether you can endure one more night of suffering for money that never seems like enough when you're actually doing the suffering. Morning brings the descent back to base camp. And descending feels like resurrection, every 100 meters of elevation loss bringing back a little more oxygen, a little more brain function, a little more appetite. By the time you reach base camp, you feel almost human again, which is the cruel trick the mountain plays. It beats you down until you're broken, then lets you recover just enough to convince you to go back up and get broken again. The banker is pleased with his progress, feeling strong, talking about summit strategy, and you're nodding and encouraging him while internally calculating oxygen supplies and weather windows and all the variables that determine success or failure at 8,000 meters. The weather forecast is showing a potential window in 5 days, a brief period where the jet stream might lift enough to make summit attempts viable. And every expedition at base camp is preparing for the same window, which means the mountain will be crowded. Queues will be long. Margins will be tight. You're helping to organize the logistics. Oxygen bottle placement at camps, food and fuel supplies, tent conditions, rope conditions, all the mundane critical details that clients never think about, but that determine whether their summit attempt is possible. The work is tedious and unglamorous. Carrying loads, checking equipment, making lists, coordinating with other Sherpas. And it's essential, the invisible infrastructure that makes the visible achievement possible. Your body is adapting. You can feel it. You're breathing more efficient. Your sleep slightly better. Your headaches less intense. The genetic advantages of generations at altitude expressing themselves in enhanced mitochondrial function and oxygen utilization. But adaptation has limits. And you're aware that even with your advantages, time above 6,000 meters is time spent deteriorating, that the clock is running on how long you can maintain function before the altitude wins. The summit rotation begins with a 2 a.m. departure for Camp 1, and you're moving through the icefall in darkness again. The route now familiar, but no less dangerous. Muscle memory guiding you across ladder bridges and around seracs, while your conscious mind stays alert for changes, for new cracks, for sounds that indicate imminent collapse. The banker is moving well, finding his rhythm, and you're making good time, reaching Camp 1 just as dawn breaks and continuing immediately to Camp 2 because the weather window is tight and there's no time for extended rest. This is the push, the final commitment. And everyone on the mountain knows it. The camps are full of expeditions staging their attempts, Sherpas moving constantly, clients trying to rest while anxiety makes rest impossible. You reach Camp 2 in early afternoon, force down food, try to sleep, fail to sleep, lie in your tent listening to the glacier and the wind, and the sound of your own labored breathing. At 6 p.m., you wake the banker. Begin the final preparation. Layers, oxygen check, headlamp check, emergency supplies, food and water. Going through the checklist with the thoroughness of someone who knows that forgotten items at 8,000 meters can mean death. The climb to Camp 3 in darkness is brutal. The Lhotse face demanding full concentration, every placement of crampons and ice axe critical. And the banker is slowing down, the accumulated altitude and exertion beginning to show. You're encouraging him, setting a sustainable pace, taking breaks to let him recover, but also watching the clock because you need to reach Camp 3 with enough time to rest before the final push to Camp 4 and then the summit. Camp 3 is a brief stop, 2 hours of attempted rest that's really just lying in a tent at 7,300 meters, trying not to think about how hard this is going to get. The climb to Camp 4 is a death march. Your body screaming for oxygen that isn't available, your mind fogging, your movements becoming automatic, and the banker is really struggling now. Each step requiring visible effort, his pace slowing to a crawl. You're doing the math. Current pace versus distance remaining versus time until summit window closes, and the numbers are not good. You make it to Camp 4 at 4 p.m., which leaves 7 hours before the summit push begins. 7 hours to rest and eat and prepare in the death zone where rest is impossible. And eating is torture. And preparation is a race against your body's deterioration. The banker is in bad shape. His oxygen saturation in the low 70s, even with supplemental oxygen. His face gray, his movement sluggish. You're having a serious conversation about whether he should continue, whether his condition allows for a summit attempt, and he's insisting he's fine. He's come too far to turn back now. All the classic statements of people who push beyond their limits and die. You're firm with him. If he can't eat and hydrate and get his oxygen saturation above 75, you're turning him around. No negotiation, because you're not carrying another barely conscious client down from 8,000 meters. He manages to force down some food, drinks water. His oxygen saturation creeps up to 77, and you make the call. He can attempt, but you'll be monitoring him constantly. And at the first sign of serious deterioration, you're descending regardless of how close to the summit you are. The 4 hours of rest before the summit push is another exercise in not sleeping. Your body too amped and oxygen deprived for real rest. And when your watch alarm goes off at 11 p.m., you feel like you haven't rested at all. Like you're starting the summit push already exhausted, already depleted, which is exactly what you're doing. The summit push from Camp 4 begins in conditions that are technically within acceptable parameters, but feel wrong. The wind stronger than the forecast predicted, the cold more penetrating, the stars too bright, which usually means weather is coming. You're climbing with the banker clipped behind you, moving in the slow, hypoxic rhythm of death zone ascent. Each step requiring conscious thought, each breath a struggle against air that's essentially poison at this concentration. The line of climbers ahead is visible as a string of headlamps ascending toward the balcony. And you're part of a queue of people all gambling with death simultaneously, all trusting the same fixed ropes and anchor points, all breathing from bottles that contain a finite amount of survival. The balcony at 8,400 meters offers a brief rest, a chance to change oxygen bottles. And here you can see the full scale of the queue. Maybe 40 or 50 people ahead of you, spread out along the ridge, moving at a pace that's agonizingly slow. This is the traffic jam scenario. the nightmare that kills people, and you're doing rapid calculations. Oxygen burn rate times wait time equals remaining oxygen, and the math is not working out. The banker wants to continue, argues that you've come this far, that the summit is close. All the rationalization of someone whose judgment is impaired by hypoxia and ambition. You're on the radio with base camp, getting updated weather information, and the forecast has deteriorated. Wind increasing, potential storm system moving in faster than predicted, the window closing. You make the call that guides are sometimes forced to make. You're turning around, the risk-reward calculation doesn't work, and the banker's protests are overridden by your professional judgment and the fact that you control the oxygen supply. He's angry, he's devastated, he's arguing, but you're already starting the descent, and he follows because he has no choice. Because without you, he dies up here. The descent is its own nightmare. You're exhausted, he's devastated and moving carelessly, and you're constantly managing him, directing his clips, checking his attachments, functioning as his life support system while he grieves the loss of his summit dreams. You're passing climbers still ascending, people who are making different calculations, deciding the risk is acceptable. And you wonder how many of them will make it back down, how many will become statistics, how many families will receive the worst phone call. Camp 4 is reached in the early morning, and you collapse into the tent, your job half done. Still need to get the banker down to thicker air, down to safety. He's in his tent, dealing with his disappointment, and you're too exhausted to care about his emotions. You kept him alive. That's success. The summit is irrelevant. The descent from Camp 4 to Camp 2 is a blur of exhaustion and relief. Elevation loss bringing back oxygen and brain function. And by the time you reach Camp 2, you're hearing on the radio that the weather has turned bad above, that multiple climbers are stranded in the queue, that rescue efforts are being organized. Later, you'll learn that 6 people died that day, caught in the traffic jam as the weather turned, running out of oxygen while waiting for slower climbers ahead, making the final fatal decision to push for the summit despite deteriorating conditions. 6 people dead, and the banker is alive. Disappointed but alive, which means you did your job correctly, made the right call despite his objections, exercised professional judgment that saved his life, even though he'll probably never acknowledge it. Might even complain about the conservative guide who cost him his summit. The descent from Camp 2 to base camp should feel triumphant. You made the right call, saved a client's life, but instead it feels hollow. 6 people died while you were descending to safety. 6 families destroyed. And the fact that you made the right decision doesn't erase the larger wrongness of the industry that puts people in these situations. The banker is quiet during the descent, processing his disappointment, and you're quiet too, processing the news of the deaths, wondering if any of the dead were people you knew. Other Sherpas who were guiding clients who made the wrong call. Base camp is subdued when you arrive. The usual post-summit celebration muted by the tragedy above. And you learn the details. 4 clients dead, 2 Sherpas dead, all caught in the traffic jam as weather turned, all running out of oxygen while waiting for the route to clear. The 2 dead Sherpas were guys you knew, worked with on previous seasons, and the news hits hard. The calculation of luck and timing that separated you from them feeling arbitrary and unfair. Their bodies are still up there, in the death zone where retrieval is nearly impossible, and they'll stay there. Frozen monuments to the cost of commercial mountaineering. The expedition company is in damage control mode, managing the public relations disaster, crafting statements about tragedy and risk and the inherent dangers of mountaineering, carefully not accepting liability, protecting themselves from lawsuits. The families of the dead Sherpas will receive some compensation, less than the families of dead Western climbers. And life will go on because the industry has survived worse scandals and emerged intact, because there's always demand for Everest, always people willing to pay for the summit experience, always young Sherpas who need the money badly enough to accept the risk. You're sitting with a group of Sherpas, drinking tea, talking about the dead, sharing memories, and also talking about the industry, about whether this tragedy will change anything or whether it will be forgotten by next season. The consensus is that nothing will change, that the economic incentives are too strong, that expedition companies make too much money, that Sherpas need the work too badly, that clients want their summits too desperately, that the whole system is designed to continue regardless of body count. There's talk of organizing, of demanding better insurance, better compensation, better safety protocols. But it's talk you've heard before, talk that never translates into action because Sherpas are replaceable. If you demand too much, you'll be replaced by someone hungrier, someone more desperate, someone willing to accept worse terms. The banker approaches you before he departs for Kathmandu, thanks you for keeping him alive, acknowledges that you made the right call even though it cost him his summit. He gives you an additional tip, significant money, and you accept it because you need it, because your family needs it, because this is how the system works. He also tells you he's coming back next season, wants you as his guide again, will train harder, be better prepared. Make the summit this time. You smile and say you'd be honored to guide him again, which is the expected response. But internally, you're thinking about whether you'll even be here next season, whether you can do this again, whether the money is worth the accumulated trauma and physical damage and moral compromise of participating in an industry that chews up Sherpas and spits them out. The trek back to Lukla is a procession of mixed emotions, relief at surviving, grief for those who didn't, exhaustion from weeks of altitude work, and a growing sense of dissonance about what you do for a living. You're descending through villages that celebrate Everest tourism, that depend on it economically, that have been transformed by it from subsistence farming communities to relatively prosperous tourism hubs. The children in these villages grow up seeing climbers and trekkers, seeing the money that flows through, seeing Sherpas return from seasons with cash that builds houses and pays for education. They grow up understanding that the mountain is both sacred and commodity, that Western tourists are both guests to be respected and sources of income to be extracted from. You stop in Tengboche, visit the monastery, sit with monks who offer prayers for the dead and blessings for the living, and the ritual feels necessary but insufficient. A traditional response to modern tragedy, ancient spirituality trying to process industrial-scale risk. The head monk talks about karma and the cycle of suffering, about accepting what cannot be changed while working to reduce suffering where possible. And it's wisdom that you intellectually accept, but emotionally struggle with, because the suffering feels so unnecessary, so driven by economics rather than fate. Your younger brother meets you in Namche. He's been working as a porter, carrying loads for trekking groups, making decent money. And he's excited, tells you he wants to train as a climbing Sherpa, thinks he can make better money guiding summit attempts. You're faced with a decision. Encourage him, support his ambitions, help him break into the more lucrative work, or warn him off. Tell him the truth about the cost. Try to steer him towards something safer. You choose honesty. Tell him about Pemba's death, about the 2 Sherpas who died this season, about the traffic jams and the exploitation, and the way expedition companies treat Sherpas as expendable. He listens. He does. But you can see in his eyes that he's not really hearing you. Or rather, he's hearing you the way you heard warnings when you were his age. As obstacles to overcome rather than wisdom to heed. He's 22, strong, optimistic, believes he'll be different, that he'll make good money and get out before the mountain takes its toll. You remember being 22, remember having the same confidence, and you know that arguing further will accomplish nothing, that he'll make his own decisions and live with the consequences. So you agree to introduce him to some expedition organizers to help him get started. Because maybe he will be one of the lucky ones. Maybe he'll make money and transition out. Maybe the statistics won't claim him. Or maybe you're just enabling his entry into the same trap that's caught you. Maybe you're complicit in feeding another body into the machine. But what else can you do? Tell him no and watch him do it anyway. At least if you help him, you can teach him. Share what you've learned, maybe give him better odds of survival. The rationalization feels weak even as you make it. But you're too tired to fight with him, too depleted from the season to take on the role of protective older brother with sufficient force. Lukla arrives, and with it the chaos of the airport, the delayed flights, the waiting crowds, and eventually the terrifying takeoff from the sloped runway. The plane dropping off the edge of the cliff before finding lift, which never stops being frightening no matter how many times you experience it. Kathmandu is overwhelming after weeks in the mountains. The noise and pollution and crowds feeling like sensory assault. The thick air at 1,300 meters feeling almost intoxicating after so long above 5,000. Your family meets you at the airport again, and this time you notice things you didn't notice before. How your wife's hair has more gray, how your kids have grown in the weeks you were gone, how your daughter is reading chapter books now and your son is interested in science. Lives progressing while you were frozen in time on the mountain. You're staying in Kathmandu for a week before returning to the village, handling administrative tasks, meeting with the expedition company to finalize payment, attending a memorial service for the 2 dead Sherpas where their families are present, and the grief is overwhelming, and you're contributing money to the collection for their widows because this is what the community does. Pools resources to support those left behind. The memorial is held at a Gompa in the city, and it's packed with Sherpas from across the climbing community, people sharing stories about the dead, celebrating their lives, mourning their loss, and also quietly calculating their own odds, wondering when their own memorial will be held. The expedition company sends representatives, offers condolences, presents the families with checks that represent compensation for the deaths, amounts that are simultaneously significant to the families and insultingly small compared to the company's revenues. You watch the transaction, the exchange of money for lives, the way capitalism processes death into debits and credits, and you feel something between disgust and resignation because this is the system, this is how it works. And individual outrage changes nothing. After the memorial, you sit with some veteran Sherpas, guys who have been in the industry for 20, 30 years, who have survived when so many others haven't. And you're trying to learn from them, understand how they've managed to last. Their advice is contradictory and ultimately unhelpful. Be conservative in your decision-making, but aggressive in your career advancement. Trust your instincts, but follow the rules. Save money, but invest in relationships. Prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. The contradictions are the point, you realize, because there is no formula for surviving high-altitude guiding long-term. No set of rules that guarantees safety. Just a collection of practices that might improve your odds if luck holds. One of the veterans, a man named Angdorji, who has summited Everest 19 times, tells you that the key is knowing when to stop. Recognizing the moment when your luck is about to run out and getting out before that moment arrives. But how do you recognize that moment? How do you distinguish the fear that should make you cautious from the fear that should make you quit? He smiles, acknowledges the question has no answer, tells you that's why so few Sherpas retire voluntarily, why most either die on the mountain or keep working until their bodies give out completely. You're meeting with the expedition company to receive your payment, and there's a discrepancy. Some of your load-carrying bonuses haven't been included. Some deductions have been made for equipment you allegedly damaged or lost. You argue, present your records, and eventually get most of what you're owed. But the whole process is adversarial, requiring you to fight for compensation that should be automatic. Another small way the industry extracts value from Sherpas beyond the obvious extraction of labor and risk. Your return to the village feels different this time. Less like coming home and more like retreating to a sanctuary that's temporary and insufficient. You're carrying the weight of the season in ways that aren't visible. The memories of the dead Sherpas, the close calls in the icefall, the traffic jam you avoided that killed 6 people. The moral compromise of taking money from an industry you increasingly believe is fundamentally exploitative. Your wife notices immediately, sees the change in you, and you're sitting together after the kids are asleep, talking about the future in a way you haven't before. She's direct, asks if you're going back next season, and you realize you don't have an answer. That for the first time in your career, you're genuinely uncertain whether you can do this again. She tells you about the tailoring business, how it's grown while you were gone, how she's trained 2 other women in the village, and they're producing enough work that there might be a path to sustainable income, not as much as climbing, certainly, but enough to survive on, enough to avoid sending you back to the mountain. It's tempting. The idea of a life where your income doesn't depend on gambling with death, where you can watch your kids grow up, where you can age without the accelerated deterioration of high-altitude work. But it's also frightening. The idea of walking away from the only significant income source you've ever had, the idea of being just another subsistence-level family in the village when you've tasted relative prosperity. You're also aware of your privilege in even having this choice. Most Sherpas don't have wives with growing businesses, don't have options beyond climbing or poverty. And your uncertainty about returning is itself a luxury that others can't afford. You spend the next weeks helping with the tailoring business, learning the basics, meeting the women your wife has trained, understanding the economics of small-scale garment production. The money is real, but modest. Maybe $150 to $200 a month if everything goes well, versus the several thousand you make in a climbing season. The math is stark, and you're running the calculations. If you don't climb next season, you'll need to reduce expenses, maybe delay the house addition you were planning, maybe pull your kids from the private school and send them to the public school. Accept a standard of living that's comfortable by village standards, but a step down from what climbing has provided. Your daughter asks why you're home more than usual, why you're helping with sewing, and you tell her you're learning new skills, exploring options. And she asks if it means you're not going back to Everest, and you realize she's old enough now to understand what you do. Old enough to worry. Old enough to want you to stay safe. Her question breaks something in you, or maybe clarifies something. And you realize that you've been thinking about this choice as purely economic when it's actually about what you're modeling for your children, what you're teaching them about value and risk and self-worth. If you keep climbing, you're teaching them that their father's life is worth less than Western tourists' recreational achievements. That economic necessity justifies any risk. That bodies are commodities to be traded for money. If you stop climbing, you're teaching them that there are limits to what you'll do for money, that safety and family matter more than income, that choosing life over profit is possible even when it's economically difficult. The decision crystallizes over the following weeks, not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual accumulation of small moments and realizations. You're watching your son play with other village children, and you notice how he runs without the knee pain that's become your constant companion, how he breathes deeply without the wheeze that settled into your lungs, how his body moves with the unconscious grace of someone who hasn't spent years destroying themselves for money. You're helping your wife with a large tailoring order, and you realize that the work is tedious but not dangerous, that the worst outcome is a missed deadline or an unhappy customer, not death or disability. And there's a profound relief in that ordinariness. You're sitting with your father, and he's telling you stories about his porter days, and you notice that all his stories end the same way, with him stopping, recognizing that his body couldn't take another season, transitioning to farming before the mountain killed him. He's 73 now, still mobile despite the pain, still present for his grandchildren. And you realize that's only possible because he quit when he did, because he chose life over the extra seasons of income that might have destroyed him completely. The climbing season is approaching again. Expedition companies are sending contracts, offering assignments, and you're not responding immediately like you usually do. You're letting the messages sit, creating space between the opportunity and the decision. Your wife notices, doesn't push, just continues building the tailoring business, accepting larger orders, training more women, creating the infrastructure for an alternative future. Your younger brother comes to visit, excited because he's been accepted for Icefall doctor training, the specialized dangerous work that you've done. And you're congratulating him while internally grieving, knowing that he's stepping into the same cycle you're trying to escape, knowing that statistics suggest he won't survive as long as you have. You try one more time to warn him, sitting him down, being brutally honest about Pemba's death, about the 2 Sherpas from last season, about the traffic jams and the exploitation and the way the industry treats Sherpa lives as less valuable than Western lives. He listens more seriously this time, acknowledges the danger, but tells you that he's eyes open about the risk, that he needs the money for his own family, that he's making the same calculation you made 10 years ago. And you recognize that you can't save him from this choice, that each generation makes its own decisions about risk and survival. And all you can do is be there for him. Teach him what you know. Hope that he's one of the lucky ones. The village is preparing for Losar, the Tibetan New Year. And the celebrations feel more significant this year, the rituals and gatherings and prayers carrying weight they didn't before. You're participating fully, helping with preparations, attending ceremonies, reconnecting with community in a way you haven't had time for in recent years, when you were always either on the mountain or recovering from the mountain. The head lama performs a blessing for the new year, prayers for health and prosperity and safety. And you're struck by how the prayers acknowledge both fate and choice, both the things beyond your control and the decisions you make in response to circumstances. After the ceremony, you're talking with other village men, and you realize that most of them have made similar calculations at some point. The choice between higher income with significant risk versus lower income with manageable risk. And most of them chose safety eventually, chose to be present for their families, chose life over money when the two came into conflict. Their validation doesn't make your choice easier, but it makes it feel less isolated, less like personal failure and more like reasonable response to unreasonable circumstances. The final decision comes not as a dramatic moment, but as a quiet conversation with your wife on an ordinary evening. You're sitting together after dinner, and she asks directly, "Are you going back to Everest this season?" And instead of the usual hedging, or the economic calculations, or the rationalization about just one more season, you say no. You're not going back. You're done. The relief on her face is immediate and overwhelming. And you realize she's been carrying the fear of your death for years, living with the constant possibility of becoming a widow, of raising children alone, of receiving the news that you died in a crevasse or on the Lhasa face or in the death zone. You're both crying, which is rare. Emotion breaking through the pragmatic stoicism that defines your relationship. And you're holding each other, acknowledging the weight of the decision and the relief of making it. The next morning, you send messages to the expedition companies, declining the contracts, explaining that you're retiring from high-altitude guiding, thanking them for the opportunities. The responses are professional and brief. No attempts to convince you to return, no acknowledgement of your years of service, just acceptance and immediate pivoting to finding your replacement. It's clarifying the way the industry processes your departure, confirming that you were always just a replaceable part in a machine, that your individual contribution mattered less than your functional role. You're surprisingly unbothered by this, the lack of sentiment feeling honest rather than hurtful. The industry showing its true nature without pretense. You're meeting with other Sherpas in the village who have made similar decisions, forming a kind of informal support group of retired climbers. And the conversation is about building alternative livelihoods, supporting each other's businesses, creating economic networks that don't depend on mountain risk. One man is running a trekking lodge, another is doing carpentry, another is farming and selling produce in Namche Market. And they're all making less money than they did climbing, but they're all alive and present for their families and sleeping without nightmares of falling or suffocating or being crushed by ice. You're investing your remaining savings in the tailoring business, buying additional sewing machines, helping your wife secure larger contracts with trekking companies for uniform production, creating a business plan that's modest but sustainable. The income projections are sobering. You'll make in a year what you used to make in a season. But the income is steady, and the risk is manageable, and the work won't destroy your body or traumatize your psyche. Your children are adjusting to having you present consistently, your daughter bringing you her homework to help with, your son asking you to play football with him, Small requests that you can now fulfill because you're not recovering from altitude damage or preparing for the next season. The domesticity feels strange at first, almost uncomfortable, because you've spent a decade structured around the climbing season, your year divided into preparation, execution, and recovery. And now you need to find new rhythms, new purposes, new ways to define yourself beyond being a Sherpa guide. You're discovering that identity is more fragile than you thought, that so much of how you understood yourself was tied to the work, to the reputation, to being someone who summited Everest 7 times and kept clients alive in the death zone. Without that identity, who are you? Just another village man trying to make a living, another father and husband, another person navigating the ordinary challenges of life, without the dramatic framework of high-altitude survival. It's humbling and also liberating. The recognition that you don't need to be exceptional to be valuable. That ordinary life has its own dignity and purpose. The monsoon season arrives, and with it, the rhythm of agricultural life that you're relearning after years of absence. The village fields require constant attention during monsoon, managing water flow, preventing erosion, protecting crops from excessive rain. And you're working alongside your father and neighbors, your body remembering skills from childhood, even as your damaged knees and back protest the different physical demands. Farming is hard work, make no mistake. But it's hard in a way that doesn't involve calculating oxygen supplies or watching for avalanches or trusting your life to aluminum ladders over bottomless crevasses. The physical pain is real. Your joints are deteriorating regardless of what work you do. But at least the deterioration isn't being accelerated by altitude and extreme cold and carrying impossible loads. You're becoming part of the village social fabric in a new way, attending community meetings about water management and crop rotation and school funding, contributing ideas and labor, being present for the collective decision-making that sustains the community. It's a different kind of importance than being a respected Everest guide. More humble, but also more integrated. More about cooperation than individual achievement. The tailoring business is growing steadily. Your wife's leadership and your investment creating something sustainable. And you're learning the business side. Inventory management, customer relations, quality control, pricing strategies. It's not exciting work. Not the kind of thing that generates adventure stories or impressive social media posts. But it's real and it's yours, and it's not extracting your life force in exchange for profit. You're also discovering that retirement from climbing doesn't mean retirement from the mountains entirely. You're approached by a trekking company about working as a guide for base camp treks, the lower altitude routes that don't involve technical climbing or death zone exposure. And you agree to try it, leading groups of tourists up to Everest Base Camp and back, sharing your knowledge and experience without the extreme risk. The work is pleasant, almost recreational compared to what you used to do. And the tourists are easier to manage when the stakes are lower, when the worst outcome is altitude headache rather than death. You're telling them about Sherpa culture, about the mountains, about climbing history. And you're finding that you can talk about Everest now without the bitterness that characterized your thoughts immediately after retiring. Distance is providing perspective, allowing you to appreciate what you accomplished while also recognizing what it cost. Holding both truths simultaneously without contradiction. Your younger brother completes his first season as an Icefall doctor, survives, makes good money, and comes to visit full of stories and excitement and plans for next season. You're happy for him. genuinely happy, while also aware that each season he works increases the probability that he won't survive the next one, that statistics are undefeated over long enough timelines. You don't say this, you just listen to his stories, offer advice when asked, and privately pray that he'll be lucky, that he'll make enough money to get out before the mountain takes him. You're attending a memorial service for another Sherpa who died on Manaslu, the 8th highest mountain, caught in an avalanche while guiding a client. And the service feels familiar and terrible. The same prayers and grief and economic desperation that drives people to accept deadly risk. The widow is there with 3 young children, and the community is collecting money to support them, and you're contributing what you can. And you're also aware that this could have been your widow, your children, your memorial, if you'd made different choices or if luck had broken differently. The proximity of that alternative reality makes you grateful and also guilty. Grateful for your own survival and guilty that you made it out when so many others didn't. Survivor's guilt mixing with relief in uncomfortable combination. The first full year of retirement brings unexpected challenges and surprising satisfactions, the texture of ordinary life revealing itself in ways you couldn't anticipate. The financial pressure is constant but manageable. You're making enough through the tailoring business and occasional trekking guide work to cover expenses and slowly rebuild savings, though there's no margin for emergencies or luxury. Your standard of living has adjusted downward. Fewer purchased goods, more reliance on home production and community sharing. A return to patterns that characterized your childhood before climbing income created relative affluence. Your children adapt better than you expected. Your daughter understanding why she switched schools. Your son never complaining about having fewer toys or treats. Both of them seeming to value having you present more than they value material comfort. This teaches you something about your own assumptions, about how you'd internalized the idea that providing financially was the primary paternal responsibility, that absence was acceptable if it generated income, that children needed money more than presents. The reality is more complex. Your kids need both, but they need safety and stability, and an available father more than they need private school or new clothes. A hierarchy of needs that you'd inverted without realizing it. You're developing a new relationship with the mountains, seeing them from the valley rather than climbing them. Appreciating their beauty without needing to conquer them or extract income from them. The Himalayas are sacred in Sherpa Buddhism, dwelling places of gods and spirits. And you're reconnecting with that spiritual understanding after years of treating them primarily as workplace and hazard. The prayers and rituals make more sense now. The offerings and the respect and the acknowledgement that humans are guests in these places. Temporary visitors who should tread carefully and gratefully. You're also confronting health consequences that you'd been deferring. Finally getting your knees properly examined, learning that you have significant cartilage damage and early arthritis. Conditions that will require ongoing management and will likely worsen with age. The doctor suggests possible surgery, expensive interventions that might restore some function. But the cost is prohibitive and the outcome's uncertain. So you're managing with pain medication and modified activity and the acceptance that this is the permanent price of your climbing years. Your lungs are similarly damaged. Chronic inflammation from years of breathing frozen air at extreme altitude. A persistent cough and reduced capacity that will never fully heal. These aren't dramatic disabilities. You're still functional, still able to work and live. But they're reminders written into your body. Permanent consequences that you'll carry forward regardless of whether you ever climb again. You're mentoring younger Sherpas who are considering climbing careers, offering honest assessments of risks and rewards. And you're finding that some listen and choose different paths, while others proceed anyway, driven by the same economic calculations that drove you. The ones who choose to climb, you help them prepare, teaching them what you know about safety and route finding and client management, hoping your knowledge improves their odds, even as you acknowledge that knowledge has limits, that the mountain ultimately doesn't care how prepared you are. The ones who choose different paths, you support however you can, introducing them to alternative opportunities, sharing business contacts, celebrating their decisions to prioritize safety over income. You're becoming an elder in the community in a way that feels strange for someone only in their early 30s. But experience ages you differently than years. And surviving what you've survived while making the choice to stop carries a certain authority that younger people recognize and respect. The second climbing season since your retirement unfolds without you. And you're experiencing it vicariously through news and community networks. Hearing about successful summits and close calls and deaths. No longer directly involved, but still connected through relationships and concern. Your younger brother makes it through his second season successfully, avoiding major incidents, building his reputation, making good money. And you're relieved and also aware that each successful season makes him more confident, potentially more likely to take risks, the classic pattern where survival breeds false sense of invulnerability. 2 Sherpas from your village die this season. One in the Khumbu Icefall when a serac collapsed, one on the descent from the summit when he ran out of oxygen while helping a client who had collapsed. The village mourns. The familiar rituals of prayer and collection and memorial. And you're participating while also feeling the complex emotions of the survivor, grateful it wasn't you or your brother, guilty about the gratitude, angry about the system that keeps producing these deaths. You're approached by a documentary filmmaker who wants to interview former Sherpas about the industry, about the exploitation and the dangers and the economic pressures that drive people to accept deadly risk. You agree to participate, seeing it as an opportunity to tell the truth, to challenge the adventure narratives that romanticize Everest while erasing Sherpa experiences. The interview is difficult, requiring you to articulate things you've mostly processed through action rather than words. To explain the moral complexity of participating in an industry you know is exploitative because the alternatives are worse. The filmmaker is sympathetic, but also extracting your story for their own purposes, turning your experience into content. And you're aware of the irony. Even your critique of the industry becomes a commodity. Your testimony about exploitation being itself a form of extraction. The documentary is released months later, gets some attention, generates brief discussion about Sherpa welfare and expedition company practices, and then fades from public consciousness without producing meaningful change. The industry continuing exactly as before, because the economic incentives are too strong and the people with power to change things benefit from the status quo. You're unsurprised by this outcome. You never expected the documentary to revolutionize the industry. But you're still disappointed. The confirmation that individual testimony and media attention aren't sufficient to challenge structural problems. The tailoring business experiences a significant expansion when your wife secures a contract with a major trekking company to produce uniforms and gear bags for their guides and porters. The contract represents steady work and income, requires hiring additional workers and buying more equipment, transforms the business from small-scale household production to something approaching a proper company. You're involved in managing the expansion, handling logistics and quality control, and you're discovering that you have aptitude for this kind of work, attention to detail, and problem-solving skills that transfer from mountain guiding to business management. The income from the contract is substantial, not quite matching what you made climbing, but close enough to make the financial sacrifice of retirement feel less severe, validating your wife's vision and effort and persistence in building this alternative. Your children are thriving in ways that justify the choices you made. Your daughter excelling in school, your son developing interests in science and music. Both of them secure and confident in ways that would have been harder if you were absent for months at a time, or if they were living with a constant fear of your death. You're able to be present for small moments, helping with homework, attending school events, playing games, having conversations. The ordinary experiences of fatherhood that you missed or minimized during your climbing years. The third year brings a kind of settled peace. The adjustment to post-climbing life complete enough that you're no longer constantly comparing present reality to mountain experiences, no longer defining yourself primarily by what you used to do. You're simply living, working, parenting, participating in community, finding satisfaction in small accomplishments and daily rhythms. The mountains are still there, visible from the village, present in consciousness, but no longer the center of your identity or economic survival. You're able to appreciate them aesthetically and spiritually without needing to climb them, without feeling that your worth is tied to altitude gained or dangers survived. Your health has stabilized at a new baseline. The knee pain and lung issues persistent, but managed. Your body adapting to its permanent limitations, finding ways to function despite the damage. You'll never run without pain, never breathe without the wheeze, never wake without joint stiffness. But these are conditions you can live with, prices you've paid that won't keep increasing if you don't return to altitude. Your brother completes his third season, and you notice something shifting in him. The initial enthusiasm dimming, the accumulated stress and close calls beginning to affect his outlook. He's not ready to quit yet. He's still making good money and building toward future security. But he's no longer talking about climbing as adventure or achievement, more as difficult work that he endures for economic reasons. You recognize this shift. Remember experiencing it yourself, the transition from identifying as a climber to identifying as someone who climbs for money. And you know this psychological change is both necessary for survival and corrosive to well-being. You're spending more time with your father, helping him with tasks that are becoming difficult as he ages. And your relationship is deepening in ways that weren't possible when you were constantly absent or recovering. He's teaching you things about farming and community history and Buddhist philosophy, knowledge he wants to pass on before he's gone. And you're receptive in ways you weren't when you were younger, recognizing the value of this transmission. He tells you he's proud of you for stopping climbing, for choosing life and family over money and achievement, and his approval matters more than you expected, filling something you didn't know was empty. The village is changing, tourism infrastructure expanding, new lodges and shops appearing, more trekkers passing through. And there's debate in the community about how to manage this growth, how to maintain cultural identity while benefiting economically from outside interest. You're participating in these discussions, advocating for balanced development that provides opportunities without destroying the social fabric, drawing on your experience with the climbing industry to warn about exploitation and extraction disguised as opportunity. Your perspective is valued because you've seen what unchecked tourism can do, how it can transform communities in ways that benefit outsiders more than locals, how economic growth can come with costs that aren't immediately visible. The tailoring business continues to grow, your wife now employing 8 women, teaching skills and creating income for families that previously had limited options. The business is becoming a model for other villages, visitors coming to learn how your wife built it, how she manages quality and contracts and worker relationships. She's become a community leader in her own right, respected and consulted. Her success demonstrating that there are paths to prosperity beyond the traditional male-dominated climbing and trekking industries. You're proud of her, obviously, but also aware that her accomplishment highlights your own privilege. You could afford to take the risk of retirement because she built this alternative, because her labor and vision created a safety net that most Sherpas don't have. Your retirement was made possible by her work, a fact that complicates the narrative of individual choice and agency. The 4th year brings unexpected opportunities when a trekking company approaches you about developing safety training programs for Sherpas, wanting to formalize the knowledge that's traditionally passed informally from experienced guides to newcomers. The work appeals to you immediately. It's a way to contribute to Sherpa welfare, to potentially reduce deaths and injuries by systematizing safety knowledge, to use your experience constructively. You're developing curriculum for crevasse rescue, avalanche awareness, altitude illness recognition, client management, all the skills you learned through experience and observation, now codified into teachable modules. The work is satisfying in a way that surprises you. Teaching feels like giving back, like transforming your survival into something useful for others, rather than just a personal accomplishment or trauma to be processed. The training programs are well received. Younger Sherpas appreciating the structured approach, expedition companies supporting it because it reduces their liability and improves outcomes. You're traveling to Kathmandu regularly to teach courses, becoming known in the industry not as a guide but as an educator and safety expert. A new identity that feels more sustainable and less extractive than your previous role. The income from training work supplements the tailoring business, creating financial stability that finally matches what you made climbing, validating the possibility of life after guiding. You're also consulted on an effort to improve Sherpa insurance coverage, working with a non-profit to pressure expedition companies and the Nepali government to mandate better death and disability benefits. The work is frustrating, progress is slow, the resistance from companies is strong because better insurance cuts into profit margins. But small victories accumulate. Increased minimum coverage amounts, clearer liability standards, emergency evacuation protocols. You're under no illusion that these improvements solve the fundamental problems. The exploitation is structural and can't be reformed away through incremental policy changes. But incremental improvement still matters, still saves lives and supports families, still represents movement toward justice, even if it's not justice itself. Your children are growing up, Your daughter now 13 and your son 11, and you're able to be present for their adolescence in ways that wouldn't have been possible if you were still guiding. Your daughter is interested in business, wants to learn from her mother about running the tailoring company, sees a future for herself that doesn't involve the traditional limited options for Sherpa women. Your son is interested in environmental science, wants to study climate change and its effects on the Himalayas, sees the mountains as subjects of study rather than sources of income or danger. Their aspirations reflect expanded possibilities, the ways that your choices and their mother's work have created different horizons for them than the ones you grew up with. You're also seeing how climate change is accelerating in real time. The glaciers retreating visibly, the Khumbu Icefall becoming more unstable, the climbing season window narrowing as weather patterns become more unpredictable. The mountain is changing, becoming more dangerous, and this will likely force changes in the industry, whether the industry wants to change or not. Economic pressure from increased risk and decreased success rates, potentially accomplishing what advocacy and regulation couldn't. You're documenting these changes, working with researchers who are studying glacial retreat and alpine ecology, contributing local knowledge and observations that complement their scientific measurements. The work feels important, contributing to understanding of global climate patterns, while also grounding that understanding in specific place and community impact. The 5th year marks a kind of anniversary. 5 years since your last summit, 5 years of building a life that doesn't depend on altitude or risk. And you're taking stock of what this alternative path has created and cost. Financially, you're stable. The combination of tailoring business income, trekking guide work, and safety training providing roughly what you made climbing without the extreme risk. Your standard of living is comfortable by village standards. Your children are educated and healthy. Your family is secure in ways that wouldn't have been guaranteed if you'd continued climbing and rolled snake eyes on the statistics. Physically, you're damaged but functional. The knee pain and lung issues permanent but managed. Your body aging faster than it should, but still capable of work and daily activity. Emotionally, you're more settled than you've been in years. The constant low-grade anxiety of climbing seasons replaced by ordinary concerns about business and children and community, which feel manageable in comparison. You're also reckoning with what you've lost or given up. The income ceiling is lower. You'll never be wealthy by Western standards, or even by successful Sherpa guide standards. The spectacular earnings from guiding are replaced by modest, sustainable income. The identity is gone too. You're no longer someone who climbs Everest, no longer the object of respect and curiosity that comes with being a high-altitude guide, just another village businessman and father, unremarkable in most ways. This bothers you less than you expected. The loss of exceptional identity feeling more like relief than diminishment. But there are moments when you miss it. Miss being someone whose work was dramatic and whose accomplishments were clear. Your brother is still climbing, now in his 6th season, and you're watching him with increasing concern because 6 seasons is around the statistical midpoint, where Sherpa mortality curves start climbing steeply, where accumulated exposure to risk starts catching up. He's had more close calls this season, a near miss in the icefall, a client who collapsed on summit day requiring emergency descent, situations that could have easily turned fatal with slightly different timing or luck. You're having more direct conversations with him about stopping, about transitioning to something safer. And he's more receptive now than he was 2 years ago, the shine of the work completely gone. replaced by grim endurance and financial calculation. He's made decent money, saved more than you did at his age, and he's starting to look at options, considering the safety training work you've been doing, thinking about starting a trekking business, mapping possible futures that don't involve the death zone. You're supporting these explorations, introducing him to contacts, sharing business knowledge, trying to make the transition easier for him than it was for you. The climbing industry continues its trajectory. More clients, every year, more traffic jams, more deaths, more Sherpas killed in service of tourist achievements. The reforms you helped advocate for have made marginal improvements, but haven't changed the fundamental dynamics. The exploitation continues in slightly better regulated form. You're no longer surprised or outraged by this, just resignedly aware, understanding that structural problems require structural solutions and individual efforts have limits. You're also seeing younger Sherpas making different choices, more of them pursuing education, seeking work outside the climbing industry, building lives that don't depend on altitude risk. This gives you hope, the sense that maybe the next generation will have more options, that the economic dependence on climbing might loosen as other opportunities develop, that fewer families will have to make the calculation between poverty and death. The present day finds you in a place you couldn't have imagined during your climbing years, settled and purposeful. Your life structured around family and community and work that doesn't require gambling with death. You're 40 years old now, which would be solidly middle-aged for most people, but feels like borrowed time given the work you used to do, given how many of your peers didn't make it this far. You're walking through the village with your father, who is now 78 and slowing down significantly. And you're very aware that you have something many Sherpas don't. A living parent to walk with, time to spend together, the possibility of elder care rather than premature mourning. Your father is proud of what you built, tells you this explicitly now in ways he didn't when you were younger, acknowledges that your choice to stop climbing was brave in its own way, that survival sometimes requires more courage than risk. The tailoring business has become a significant village employer, 15 women now working, producing not just uniforms, but also selling traditional Sherpa crafts to tourist markets, preserving cultural skills while generating income. Your wife is considering expanding into fair trade export, connecting directly with Western buyers to cut out middlemen, potentially increasing income significantly. The business growth is enabling other changes. Improved education access for workers' children, healthcare contributions, community development projects funded by business profits. Your work has similarly evolved. You're now consulting with the Nepali government on mountain safety regulations, working with international alpine organizations on standards and protocols. Your experience and knowledge valued at a systemic level. The work is still frustrating. Change is still slow. Vested interests still resist reforms that would cut into profits. But you're operating at a level where you can influence policy rather than just individual outcomes, where your voice carries weight in discussions about industry practices. You're also writing, documenting your experiences and observations, contributing to a growing body of literature by Sherpas about Sherpas, challenging the Western narratives that dominate mountaineering history. The writing is difficult, requiring you to confront memories and emotions you'd rather leave unexamined. But it feels necessary. The testimonial responsibility of survivors to tell the truth about what happens, who pays the real costs, what the actual dynamics are beneath the adventure stories. Your children are becoming young adults. Your daughter is 16 and planning to study business administration at university. Wants to eventually take over and expand the family company. Your son is 14 and passionate about climate science, already connecting with researchers, planning education and career around environmental work. Their futures are wide open in ways that yours never was. The choice is you and your wife made, creating possibilities that didn't exist for your generation. You're sitting with your brother, who has finally decided to stop climbing after 7 seasons, has accepted a position helping you with the safety training programs. And you're talking about the decision, the relief and loss and uncertainty that comes with stepping away. He's saved enough money to be comfortable, to have options, to not return to subsistence poverty. But he's also grappling with identity loss, with the question of who he is if not a climber, with the need to find new purpose and meaning. You're sharing your own experience of this transition, acknowledging that it's difficult but possible, that life after climbing can be fulfilling in different ways, that survival and presence and ordinary contributions have their own value. He's listening, processing, beginning the psychological work of redefining himself. And you're there for him, offering the support and understanding you wish you'd had during your own transition. Looking back across the journey from high-altitude guide to village businessman, teacher, and community member, you're struck by how the choice that seemed so difficult and risky at the time has proven to be the right one. Not just for you, but for everyone connected to you. Your family is intact and thriving. Your children have futures that don't require risking their lives. Your wife has built something substantial and sustainable. And you're alive to witness and participate in all of it. The alternative timeline, where you kept climbing, likely would have ended with your death or severe disability by now. The statistics are clear on this. 7 or 8 or 9 seasons pushing luck further than it could reasonably stretch. You would have made more money in that timeline, certainly, perhaps enough to build a bigger house or send your children to better schools. But you also likely wouldn't be here to enjoy it, or even to ensure it was used well. The cost-benefit analysis is brutally clear in retrospect, though it never felt clear in the moment when economic pressure and identity and community expectations all pointed toward continuing. You're thinking about all the Sherpas who didn't make the choice you made, either because they didn't have the options, or because they calculated differently, or because luck ran out before they could stop. Pemba and the 2 Sherpas from last season, and the dozens of others from previous years, all of them people with families and dreams and futures that were traded for tourist summits and expedition company profits. Their deaths were unnecessary in the deepest sense, not acts of God or natural disasters, but predictable outcomes of an exploitative system that continues because it's profitable, and because people need the work, and because wealthy tourists want the experience regardless of who dies making it possible. You're also thinking about the Sherpas still climbing, including many you know and care about. And you're aware that some of them will die this coming season, or the season after, or the one after that. That the statistics are indifferent, and the mountain is patient, and luck eventually runs out for everyone. This knowledge sits heavy. The survivor's burden of knowing what's likely coming while being unable to stop it, able only to warn and support and hope that individuals will make choices that protect them even as the system continues to demand sacrifice. The mountains themselves remain, indifferent to human drama, beautiful and deadly. Sacred spaces that humans have converted into commodities and workplaces and graveyards. You still love them, still feel the spiritual connection that characterized your childhood understanding. But you no longer need to climb them to honor that connection. No longer believe that conquest or summit or altitude gained has anything to do with the actual value of the mountains. They simply are, existing in their own right. And humans are visitors who should approach with humility and respect, rather than ambition and extraction. Your life now is ordinary by adventure standards, remarkable only in its unremarkability. The quiet daily work of family and business and community. The small satisfactions of children growing and relationships deepening and modest prosperity achieved through sustainable means. This ordinariness feels like victory, like the success that matters, like the outcome worth choosing even when it meant walking away from exceptional achievement and dramatic identity. You're sitting on the roof of your house in the evening, watching the sun set on the Himalayas, the peaks turning gold, and then pink and then purple as light fades. And you're feeling something close to contentment. The sense that your life is aligned with your values, that you're contributing positively, that you're present for the people who matter, that you survived not just physically, but spiritually, that you escaped the trap that caught so many others. The sunset fades. Stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Prayer flags flutter in the evening breeze. And you're heading inside to your family, to dinner and conversation and the ordinary evening rhythms of a life that doesn't require you to gamble with death. A life that is enough. A life that is finally, blessedly, your own.